It is also the first Cabinet meeting for our new permanent Chief Executive, Dr. Lorraine O'Donnell. So Lorraine, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Leader, and good afternoon, everybody. I am Lorraine O'Donnell, the new Chief Executive, and I'm extremely grateful for the very warm welcome I've had in my first few weeks in the Council and indeed in Cheshire East. I couldn't have imagined when I was appointed that I'd be attending my first Cabinet meeting using Microsoft Teams. And in my short time here, I've been incredibly impressed by the flexibility of members and officers to work in entirely new ways to serve the public in these challenging times. I do look forward to meeting all members eventually in person, but in the meantime, I look forward to working with all of you remotely to deliver the ambitions for Cheshire East. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome to Cheshire East. Like many councils across the country, we are working to respond to the coronavirus pandemic and at the same time to keep essential local services going, protect our most vulnerable people and support communities, businesses and the economy. We will be holding 1 minute silence at the start of the next full council meeting in memory of all those who have lost their lives to COVID-19. Thank you to everyone for complying with the measures that have been put in place locally and nationally to fight this disease and to save lives. Social distancing has not been easy for any of us, and the Council has had to make changes to many of its services. I'd like to thank officers for innovating and implementing these changes, and residents and customers for their patience and understanding. I wanted to mention a few key examples. Keeping services going. We have kept open all of our parks and public rights of way and have waived car parking charges. We closed Tatton Park in line with National Trust advice and will keep the decision under review. Next week, we are reopening household waste recycling centres. Supporting care homes and our workers with the PPE they need. We are grateful for the government drops, but we have had to supplement them through our own suppliers and using our money. Thirdly, our workforce. We quickly moved to allow staff who can work at home to do so. In practical terms, that meant a huge rollout of IT equipment and support, including all 81 members who now have the capability they need. We have also put in place a comprehensive wellbeing support. We are sending out regular communications and working constructively with our trade union colleagues. Fourthly, money. We already know that it is going to cost many millions of pounds. Again, we are grateful to the government for just over £19 million. This is a fraction of what we need, and I will keep lobbying to make sure that the government are true to their word of giving councils the resources they need to respond. Finally, working together as part of the wider Cheshire and Warrington Local Resilience Forum. This gives us all a stronger voice, speaking up for our local residents, communities and businesses. Councillor Laura Crane, I understand that you would like to make an announcement.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I'd just like to make an announcement about the household waste recovery centres, please. The Cheshire East Council, along with 98% of local authorities, closed our household waste recycling centres early on when COVID-19 legislation guidance was issued, interpreting the tip as a non-essential travel reason. This time has been used productively to put in place measures to allow safe social distancing on and around the sites once they're reopened. Restrictions and travel management will be in place at all sites, which I would encourage all residents to abide by to keep all site and road users safe. So as you've already mentioned there, Leader, on Monday the 11th of May we will be reopening all of our sites. We anticipate an initial rush, so I would ask that everyone thinks long and hard about whether they need to travel at this time or could wait until after the initial rush has died down. This would help us to support our environmental strategy by not sending excess waste to landfill as well. I know that personally I'd love to have a clear out of the garage, but we'll hold off for now. This is not to discourage anyone from bringing waste which presents a risk to our household. But if you can store it safely for a little longer, then I'd encourage you to do so. This afternoon a press release will be issued, so I would ask everyone to read it through for the full details. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Laura Crane. Before I hand over to Councillor Craig Brown, I wanted to stress that this will be a different kind of meeting in terms of how it looks and feels. At times we may have to ask you to bear with us as we work through any little glitches, but we are confident that we have a system here that we can use effectively for Cabinet and other meetings in the coming weeks. I'd like to thank colleagues in Cabinet and other members for their cooperation, and officers for putting these arrangements into place quickly so that we can keep the essential business of the Council going. Please mute your microphone when not speaking. I do have a list of speakers on each item. If you want to catch my eye during the meeting, please use the chat facility within Microsoft Teams. Councillor Craig Brown.
Thank you very much, Leader. And can I firstly echo your comments about the ground we've covered over the recent weeks. We know there is more to do, but we stand ready to do all we can to help get the borough back on its feet again as we move out of this crisis. In particular, there's just one or two things I'd like to mention. Firstly, business helping business. We're supporting businesses alongside our partners while we respond to the COVID-19 impacts to the local community, but also the local economy as well. Businesses of all sizes, from sole traders to multinational companies, are being affected by the pandemic. This is a difficult time for all of us, especially businesses, with some struggling to increase capacity for demand amid staff shortages, but also while some have staff surplus that they're struggling to retain in the current circumstances. We're working with local businesses, the Chambers of Commerce, the Cheshire and Warrington Local Enterprise Partnership, Marketing Cheshire and local residents to channel business-based support to meet local needs and to enable businesses to, of course, support each other as well. In terms of financial support, we've delivered now more than £62 million in grants to over 5,000 small businesses. We've also set up People Helping People, a brand new service to recognise that this is still a very challenging situation for everybody. We want to continue to help local people support one another by harnessing and supporting the fantastic work that's already being done in communities across the borough. And we're working collaboratively with our partners to channel that community-based support to meet local needs. And shielding, there are currently more than 2,200 residents within the shielding hub, and we've issued more than 130 emergency parcels across the borough to those who hadn't received a government parcel or who were newly registered on the shielding programme. So through a combination of both purchases and donations, the council has replenished stocks and enhanced the government's parcel content with the inclusion of toiletries and other items in addition to food. Of course, on Friday we have the VE Day celebrations, and while the country is dealing with the COVID-19 battle, it's right that we make time to commemorate VE Day. In line with the latest expert medical and scientific advice on mass gatherings, plans to mark the 75th anniversary of the end of the Second World War in Europe have had to change clearly. And this applies in Cheshire East as well as across the country. So we do still intend to mark this important occasion in a number of ways, including promoting national activities and ways to get involved, flying the Union flag at a number of our buildings, extensive social media activity, and also we're putting in place final arrangements for a special online commemoration, and more details on that will follow. So I'd like to encourage our residents and communities to participate as best they can. As well as dealing with the implications of COVID-19, we're also making sure that we're continuing with our exciting plans to develop the borough. And the Cabinet agenda today, I think, makes a very clear statement in that regard. And finally, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Councillor Quentin Abel for the contribution that he's made to our Cabinet discussions and also our environmental policy initiatives in particular. It's been a tough ask for a newly elected councillor to step straight into a Cabinet role, and Quentin has been equal to that. However, from next week he'll be taking on several new roles within the council, which will necessitate him stepping down as deputy portfolio holder. He will continue to be this council's environment champion. In his place, I'm appointing Councillor James Nicholas as a cross-cutting Cabinet support member. James will support me in the transport element of my own portfolio, as well as supporting Councillor Crane in the highways elements of her portfolio. These are two very important areas of council services, as well as key parts of the joint administration's place agenda. As we begin to emerge from the current national crisis, investment in both will be key to supporting our economic recovery as a borough, and I look forward to welcoming Councillor Nicholas as a member of the Cabinet team. This change will be effective from tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. If I could now move to the formal agenda items. The first item is apologies for absence. Now, rather than asking for apologies for absence, I'm going to run down the Cabinet members, so each Cabinet member could very briefly introduce themselves. Councillor Craig Brown.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Craig Brown, Deputy Leader of the Council and Portfolio Holder for Strategic Infrastructure and Transport.
I'm Councillor Sam Corcoran, Leader of the Council. Councillor Laura Crane.
Thank you, Leader. Laura Crane, Portfolio Holder for Highways and Waste.
Councillor Catherine Flavelle.
Thank you, Leader. Catherine Flavelle, I'm Portfolio Holder for Children and Families.
Councillor Tony Fox.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Tony Fox, Portfolio Holder for Planning.
Councillor Laura Judah.
Thank you. I'm Councillor Laura Judah, Portfolio Holder for Adult Social Care and Health.
Councillor Nick Mannion.
Good afternoon. Nick Mannion, Portfolio Holder for the Environment and Regeneration.
Councillor Jill Rhodes.
Good afternoon, I'm Councillor Jill Rhodes. I'm Portfolio Holder for Public Health and Corporate Services.
Councillor Amanda Stott.
Hello, I'm Amanda Stott and I have responsibilities for finance, ICT and communications.
And finally, Councillor Mick Warren.
Good afternoon, Councillor Mick Warren, Portfolio Holder for Communities.
Thank you. So we are all present, so we have no apologies for absence. Are there any declarations of interest? Right. Thank you. I'll take that. There are no declarations of interest. Moving on to item 3, public speaking time. I have 4 members of the public registered to speak there, and I'll take them in this order: Richard Hamilton, Sue Helliwell, Andrew Backhouse and Brian Sylvester. So if I could start with Richard Hamilton. We've got a detailed question from you. Would you like to say something now, or do you want to read out your question?
I'd like to read out the question, Councillor.
Okay, over to you.
First of all, thank you very much for allowing me to attend today, and thank you also to Katie Small for setting this up for me. The Section 106 agreement for Elworth Hall Farm development in Sandbach included a provision for a token crossing on the Middlewich Road at School Lane. Contribution from the developer was £80,000, which included a commuted sum of £10,000 for maintenance of the facility. The provision was considered by the parties to the Section 106 agreement and the planning inspector to be necessary to make a proposal acceptable, which otherwise would be unacceptable in planning terms, and the inspector confirmed that it complied with the Community Infrastructure Levy regulations. Cheshire East Council has previously confirmed that Section 106 monies can only be used for the work specified in the legal agreement. Cheshire East Highways has now planned to downgrade the token crossing at School Lane and replace it with a central pedestrian refuge, and has agreed this with the ward councillor. This proposal will not adequately facilitate cyclists. The reasons given for downgrading are that a signalised crossing would be disruptive to traffic, and has felt that the criteria for providing a signalised crossing would not meet the Cheshire East Council threshold. The location already has a school patrol person at peak times, so traffic is already disrupted. And the adjacent recently installed crossing at Abbey Road did not meet the CEC threshold for a signalised crossing. My questions are: what authority has the Highway Authority to unilaterally change the contents of a legally binding Section 106 agreement? 2. What authority has a ward councillor to unilaterally change the contents of a legally binding Section 106 agreement? 3. Since the downgraded works are not specified in the Section 106 agreement, how will the works be paid for? And 4. When will Cheshire East Council refund to the developer the £80,000 unspent Section 106 contribution? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I'll come back on it in a bit more detail later. Councillor Catherine Flavelle, did you want to deal with some aspects of that question?
Yes, thank you, Leader. Hi, Richard. Nice to see you. Thanks for bringing this to Cabinet. As you know, I've been obviously involved in this for quite a long time, and I do share your frustrations about the changes that have been made. There was certainly no agreement on my part to make the changes, although I have been informed of them. There are many ongoing issues, and I'm going to continue to be investigating this along with others. But my main concern is the safety of the children at the school, and any plans that are there to assist that, then I would be in support of those. But I believe you will get a written response, and that the leader wishes to speak on this as well. Thanks again.
Thank you.
As Councillor Flavelle has said, we will give you a detailed written response within 10 days. I just wanted to put on record my thanks to you. I can remember you raising this matter when I was a backbench opposition councillor, so this has been going on for a number of times, and you have done extensive detailed work on this of good quality. So thank you for this and for your work in other areas. I know there are some issues that I would like to be able to meet up with you to discuss, but not in the current climate. So thank you for your question. We will get you a written reply to that.
Thank you very much.
If I could ask Sue Halliwell, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you, Leader. And can I also thank Katie Small for helping me get to grips with the internet for today's meeting. And also, can I thank Laura Crane for answering the first part of my question. My second part is, will Cheshire East Council suspend the charge for rubble as a goodwill gesture to us residents for a limited time?
Councillor Laura Crane, did you want to respond to that now?
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for your question. The rubble charges are something that we are in discussion about around the reopening of the household waste recycling centres, so I do appreciate that. Probably best if I respond with a written response on that after this meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Could I ask Andrew Backhouse to ask his question?
Right, so I hope it's all coming.
Sorry, Andrew, welcome. If I could just say, we have got a detailed question from you. Do you want to read out the whole question now? I notice you've ended the question with just the fundamental part of the question. Yes. We have got the full detailed one here. If you just want to read out the key points, then we could respond from there.
I was going to do a very quick summary for those who hadn't seen the key points, but basically, I'm Andrew Backhouse and I'm Chair of Transition Wilmslow and the Cheshire East Climate Alliance. Am I coming through all right?
You're coming through very well, and thank you to all the speakers who've registered for this technology. We've been able to see you as well as hear you. Okay, it's just, no, it's all new to us all, isn't it? And I want to say thank you to the council for actually using things like this, because it's about carbon emissions, and this is a great achievement to do it, to cut your emissions. So basically, I want to say there's wonderful progress you've been doing in consultation on the environment strategy and on the carbon action plan. There's some great work by this firm called Anthesis, which looks really exciting, but it really feels weak into the actual documents for the strategy and the plan. So, you know, they raised some really brilliant things about clear targets, work with the community and work on air quality and things like this, but it's actually really weak in the actual documents, building standards and restoration of peat bogs. So the question, you've set a really ambitious zero carbon by 2025 strategy, which I think is brilliant. I'm very impressed. I don't think we'll ever achieve it, but I think it's wonderful to try. And thank you for trying that. And we want to know what targets are going to be set into this strategy and the action plan, which actually builds in more of that advice from Anthesis and the response to the consultation. For example, energy efficiency of new build, the council estate, public transport, restoration of peat bogs and other sequestration.
In other words, what improvements or setting of targets will you add before accepting these strategies? We do want to see Cheshire East beating the everybody else and doing really, really well, and we know you do too. So we want to see some improvements here.
Thank you. If I could just pick up on one point before I hand over to Councillor Mannion. I hope you'll stay on the line until we get on to item 8, which is the Cheshire Carbon Action Plan, when that sets out in detail how we will meet the ambitious targets that we have set. Councillor Nick Mannion.
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon. Thanks for your further feedback on the environment strategy and the carbon action plan. The environment strategy has been designed to provide the policy framework for the council to ensure everything we do and everything we can influence considers the environmental and climate change impact. More detailed actions and targets will be defined, particularly concerning new development and public transport, which we bring forward with the site allocations and development policies document, the bus strategy and the town delivery plans, which are all in preparation. We have also committed to produce reports later this year and updates on the progress and review of the action plans and targets. The carbon action plan itself includes detailed and ambitious targets for reducing carbon emissions from the council's estate and its vehicular fleet. It recommends that the council adopts the Building Research Establishment Environmental Assessment Method, more easily called BREEAM, or excellent or equivalent standards for new build, and aims for the highest BREEAM standards achievable for the refurbishment of existing buildings in Cheshire East. It also sets out ambitious targets for at least 130 hectares of tree planting, peatland restoration and other natural sequestration solutions on council-owned land. Having said all that, if you have suggestions for the targets we should be aspiring to, please feel free to share them with me outside this meeting so we can give them proper consideration. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. We'll certainly share some targets back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Brian Sylvester, I think you're the last speaker, so would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine.
Can you see me?
I can see you as well.
Good. Thanks for taking my question, Chairman. I'm very pleased to be participating in this first ever online meeting of the Cabinet. As a founder member of the Borough Council, I'm pleased to be in this situation. I'd also like to thank Katie Small for her help. My question, on behalf of the Putting Crewe First group, is on household waste sites. I'd like to know why the sites in Cheshire East have been closed. Not all councils in the country have closed them. They're now being closed, or will be closed, for 7 weeks by the time they reopen. They are an important basic service which the public pay for. There was no legal need. Is no legal need to close them. Unfortunately, the closure has led to fly tipping, which is a health hazard. It's unsightly and costly for you as a council to clean up. The sites can be operated safely, as we know, for the public and the staff. Social distancing is entirely possible on household waste sites. So my question, Chairman, is why close when there is no need to?
Thank you for the question. Councillor Laura Crane.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. I'll refer you back to my earlier statement on the fact that 98% of councils around the country did interpret the need to limit travel to essential only, to include a trip to the household waste recycling centre as non-essential travel, although we have used that time to ensure that we can open safely at a time which has now been set for next Monday. Obviously, I have immense sympathy for anyone who has suffered from any of the fly tipping that we have seen an increase in, but it hasn't been an increase that's been seen in every authority. Some areas have actually seen a reduction in fly tipping due to the fact that people just aren't out and travelling, so they're not going about and fly tipping into fields and back alleys and the like that we have seen around the borough. What I would say is that bulky waste collections have still been available. Our curbside collections have also continued, which again, we are one of the authorities in the country that have managed to maintain all of our curbside collections through the whole of this crisis, and I can't thank the staff at Answer and our Cheshire East waste teams enough for that. It's been something that's been a very difficult time, but thankfully they've been able to bring in additional staff and transferred others from non-essential areas to keep the service running. With so many people at home, obviously there has been a significant increase in the amount of waste that we're seeing at curbside. This has also created a bit of an overspill, but not in every area. There have been areas where we already have issues, and we are currently looking into our waste strategy. We hope to be making some changes very soon. But yeah, again, I'd like to thank the staff because we really have managed to keep that curbside collection going all the way through without very much disturbance at all to anyone. So yeah, thank you all. But we will be reopening on Monday, and yeah, I hope that people will adhere to the protocols that we're setting in place.
All right, thank you for the detailed answer, and thank you, Brian Sylvester, for your question. That brings us to an end of the public speaking time. If I could now move on to item 4, which is questions to Cabinet members. We have 14 people who registered to speak, so I'll be allocating 1.5 minutes to each speaker. I'll be taking them in the following order: Brian Puddicombe, Susie Akers-Smith, Rachel Bailey, Michael Beamland, June Buckley, Tony Dean, Steve Hogburn, Mike Seward, Stuart Gardner, Margaret Simon, Sally Holland, Josh Saunders, Kate Parkinson and Liz Wardlaw. If there's any visiting member who hasn't been listed there who wants to ask a question, then please use the chat facility and I'll fit you in at the end if we have time. So if I could start with Brian Puddicombe.
Many thanks, Leader. It's great to be able to ask a question at this virtual meeting. My question is to Councillor Mannion regarding agenda item 13, the procurement of a housing development framework. I would first declare an interest as a board member of Peaks and Plains Housing Trust, who are keen to continue working closely with the council in pursuit of their corporate objective of creating great places to live. My question is, does the portfolio holder agree that in the economic climate that will face us in the aftermath of COVID-19, the only certainty will be uncertainty? The need then for Cheshire East to promote and bring forward housing stock, and affordable housing especially, will then be even greater. Does he also agree that renting rather than home ownership is becoming the new norm? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mannion, do you wish to respond to that now?
Yes, I'm quite happy to, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Puddicombe. Yes, even before the crisis erupted at the beginning of March, the council are already putting in place a range of policies and strategies with regard to the rented sector. I'll very briefly touch on it. The registration of houses in multiple occupation, HMOs, and we are also investigating compulsory registration of all rented property in specific localities where the poor management of the property has been associated with levels of antisocial behaviour such as fly tipping, which has been mentioned earlier this afternoon. Yes, one thing I am concerned about is all the support to date that has been announced by the government has been for owner occupiers regarding mortgages or landlords regarding buy to rent landlords. The only support tenants have had is a promise that there's a freeze on taking possession action against them if they're unable to pay the rent during the crisis. The report itself, and I'll go in more detail later this afternoon, does seek to improve the mix of affordable housing across Cheshire East, whereas previously it has very much been focused upon subsidised housing for purchase. We very much want to encourage the development of land in our ownership by registered social landlords such as housing associations, where a more equitable mix of housing, both of tenure and also of type, And one of the things that are raised frequently is the absence of any bungalows being developed in Cheshire East, and the development framework may be a way to increase the supply of bungalows either at social rent or intermediate rents. Regarding what will happen after the end of the COVID-19 crisis, I can't say, but what I will say is that we are trying to make sure Cheshire East is a place where everybody can afford a home, regardless of whether it's for rent or for purchase. Thank you.
Thank you for that answer. Susie Akers-Smith. Hello, is Councillor Susie Akers-Smith present? If I could then move on, Councillor Rachel. Oh, sorry, Susie. Yes, I can hear you now.
Can you hear me? Sorry about that.
I'd like to ask you a question.
Okay, yes. COVID-19 emergency measures for social distancing. We have just spent 6 weeks in lockdown in order to save lives. Coronavirus isn't just going to end, which is why the government are allowing towns and cities across the UK to implement COVID-19 emergency measures to allow people to continue to socially distance themselves in public places. Under these measures, Cheshire East Council are allowed to temporarily widen pavements, create temporary cycle lanes, put in place 20-mile-per-hour speed limits and other initiatives which will enable people to be socially distant in places where there are a high mix of pedestrians and vehicles, keeping people safe. The lockdown has made the road safer for people to walk and cycle, and bicycle sales have risen by 15% during lockdown. To continue that support of residents to walk and cycle, could we, where there are a high mix of pedestrians and cyclists and vehicles, to enable people to socially distance themselves, temporarily widen pavements, create cycle lanes and reduce speed limits to 20 miles per hour? And at the same time, can we use these measures as a trial by reducing speed limits and creating more space for pedestrians and cyclists? How these measures improve the built environment by making it safer to walk and cycle, with a view to making permanent changes across our towns and villages. By making these changes, we will make huge progress in becoming carbon neutral by 2025. Hashtag ditch the car.
A nice ending. Thank you for giving notice of the question, or the idea of the question. Councillor Laura Crane, did you want to come back on that?
I do indeed. Thank you, Leader, and thank you for your question, Susie. I think it's something that we desperately need to be looking at. A lot of people have changed their travel habits now. For example, I can't remember the last time I was in an office for a meeting. It has shown what we can do with this technology that's at our fingertips. We are already looking into the possibilities of certainly in town centres widening pavements to allow social distancing to continue for quite some time, but each has to be taken on a case-by-case basis, of course, and I see this as a perfect opportunity to trial those for a longer-term solution in the future to encourage people to be active and to, as you say, ditch the car. So it's something I've long wanted to move from having 2 cars to 1 car. It would be wonderful to be able to do that. So it's something that I know a lot of people feel strongly about, and I promise you we are looking into it at the moment. Thank you.
Can I just say that's music to my ears, and thank you, Laura.
Okay. Rachel Bailey, would you like to ask your question? Hello, is Rachel Bailey present? If not, I'll move on to Mike Beanland. So, is Councillor Rachel Bailey present? Right. If I can move on then, Councillor Michael Beanland, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, please, Leader. Thanks very much. I'd like to thank the officers and staff for Cheshire East for their efforts in keeping communication going during these bad times. But they've done a sterling job so far, of which this is part of it. My original question was regarding the 391-392 bus route, which has been answered this morning by a letter from Councillor Brown, which I'm quite grateful for. And it does give an assurance that the service will be resumed once this lockdown response has ended, which is good assurance. I would like to make sure, or I like an assurance really, that the councillors and the ward councillors and the town council will be kept informed of any developments on this service. And that's the first. The last question is the next response of the government's COVID response is track and trace, which is going to be very dependent upon local knowledge and I just wondered what Cheshire East services are you prepared to help with the track and trace efforts that are about to be launched on us? Thank you.
Okay, so we've got two questions there. Would anybody like to answer the first one first? So probably Councillor Craig Brown, I think you were named. Would you like to answer the first question?
Yeah, thanks very much, Leader. Happy to address the first element of the question, although I think as Councillor Beanland, thank you very much, acknowledged, I've largely answered the issues around the 391, 392, but yes, I am absolutely happy to give you and fellow councillors along the route of the 391 and 392 service that you will be kept informed of proposals to reinstate the service once we start to move out of lockdown. I do think it's important to say, however, that it is very, very likely the bus network, as with other parts of the economy, will look very, very different as we move out of lockdown to how it looked before we went into it. Thank you.
Is there any councillor wanting to tackle the issue of track and trace? Right, no, in that case, I think if we can provide you with a written answer to the points on track and trace.
That's fine, thanks, Leader.
June Buckley.
Hi, can you hear me?
Very well, thank you, June.
That's great. A couple of things. First of all, just that I was really pleased that officers rang to see how the council's health was going. I thought that was very thoughtful. And Susie's thing about cycling, I think it would be nice if the council could do some expo for electric bikes. Now my question, current policy on burial grounds is based on that introduced by the previous administration. Does the current administration intend to revisit this, especially as existing policy is not in line with current administration policy on the environment? Here in Alsager, we're running out of burial space and in the surrounding parishes, and we would have to travel to Macclesfield or Crewe to visit graves of loved ones. So I was wondering, will there be some reconsideration and not necessarily at Cheshire East expense if a private facility was put forward, etc.? And I'm within the 90 seconds.
Well done. Councillor Jill Rhodes, did you want to come back on that now?
Thank you, Leader. I am aware that I've only just really taken over this area of responsibility, but I believe that this question has been asked previously around the Alsager area. If possible, I would like to give Councillor Buckley a written response.
That's lovely, and it has been something that's been ongoing way before last May when I was elected, and obviously the ground is getting shorter and shorter, and I had a message from a resident, you know, who was saying how awful it would be if people died during this awful outbreak if they couldn't be buried locally. Anyway, thank you very much. Have a lovely day, everyone. I'm staying with the meeting, but I might take my video off because I'll be moving around doing other bits as well. Bye-bye.
Yes, and thank you for other councillors. I would say if you're not speaking, please do mute yourself. I think everybody's doing that. But also it's probably a good idea to turn the video off if you're not actually participating in the meeting, because that will save bandwidth and also avoid the rest of us seeing the insides of your house if you're walking around with your laptop. Tony Dean, I think you're next up. Thank you for giving notice of the question. Would you like to ask your question now?
Yes, I'm going to ask the question, but first of all, in answering, I'd like you to take the following aspects into account. Tatton Park is fully closed to the public at the moment, and it was closed on March the 22nd. The reasons I was given for the closure are as follows. People were disrespecting the social distancing in the park. National Trust have closed all their nearby destinations, thus creating extra travel to Tatton. They didn't have enough staff to guarantee safety of the visits, and also the final the reason was Tatton Park is not a public park and does not come under the recent advice from the government Secretary of State to open all parks. But nearly 6 weeks into lockdown, I don't believe the first two reasons hold water anymore. People are respecting social distances in general and they're not travelling. As for safety, if the park is open to pedestrians, there is no need for safety staff. there aren't any on the public highways or footpaths where park users are now being directed to get their exercise. As for the destination argument, the park is a destination, not a public park. Destinations are laughable under current lockdown rules. The original reason for the grant of the lease of the grounds to CEC from National Trust was to create a public park. So in my view, it is one. Please, can we reopen Tatton Park for pedestrian use, as it's a magnificent resource of the public well-being. No, never more needed than now, I have to say. So my question is, can we reopen Tatton Park as soon as possible?
Councillor Nick Mannion, would you like to answer that question?
The short answer to Councillor Dean is yes, we will open Tatton Park as soon as it is safe to do so. COVID-19 continues to be a serious public health matter, leading recently to an extension by the government of the lockdown arrangements for a further 3 weeks. While the council has kept its arrangements under review, the original reason for closure of visitors to the 1,000 acres of Tatton Park remain valid. This is in response to the risk posed by non-essential travel, the need to ensure that social distancing is not compromised, and the need to work from home wherever possible in support of measures to control the spread of the coronavirus. The area's local parks, the Knutsford open spaces and rights of way have remained open for the benefit of all its residents. The council will continue to respond to guidance, keeping the question of Tatton Park under review in the context of the wider risks posed by the pandemic, and will respond accordingly. As the situation starts to improve, hopefully, the government guidance on travel, working from home and social distancing change, we will be able to look forward to welcoming visitors and their very welcome income back to Tatton Park again. As I said right at the outset, Councillor Dean, we will open the park when it is safe to do so.
Okay, thank you for the answer and for the question. Now, Steve Hoffman has used the chat facility to withdraw his question. Mike Seward, is Mike Seward present?
I'm here, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine. If you'd like to ask your question then.
Question to Councillor Mannion. When will the report on the flood incidents in Poynton, Kettlesham and Bollington be available? And secondly, we've had lots of social media comments here in Poynton that the household waste site will be opening next Monday, the 11th. Is this correct? Thank you.
Councillor Mannion, I think the answer to the second part is quite easy for those who've been on the meeting throughout. Do you want to answer the first part as well?
Could you repeat the first part again? Because you just broke up a little bit during it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, that will be my computer. I've had great difficulties with it. It concerns the flood incidents in Poynton, Bollington and Kettlesham last year. When will the long-awaited report on those incidents and hopefully the mitigation measurements to be taken to try and prevent further occurrences be available?
I think you're referring to the Section 19 report, aren't you?
Section 19, 20, 21, I'm not bothered what number it has.
I will provide you with a written reply on that when we spoke to the relevant officers. I understand some of the initial findings were shared with the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, sorry, the Environment and Regeneration Overview and Scrutiny Committee earlier this year, but I will find out what the timetable is for the publication of the final report and share that with you and other ward councillors as well.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
And the answer to the point on the household waste recycling centres, Councillor Laura Crane announced at the start of this meeting they will open on the 11th of May. However, we would encourage people to bear with us for a bit and only go to household waste recycling centres in the initial week if it is absolutely essential, because we have seen in other areas there's been a bit of a rush. So we would like to avoid that here if at all possible. The next question I have down is from Councillor Stuart Gardner. Is Stuart present? No. Councillor Margaret Simon, do you wish to ask a question?
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
I hear you fine. Welcome, Margaret.
Thank you. My question is to Councillor Nick Mannion too, and possibly to Councillor Quentin Abel. As urban greening is mentioned in the environmental strategy due to be discussed later in today's agenda under item 7, I think it's timely to ask the following question. I'd like to ask the council to review its position regarding replacing trees on grass verges when they've had to be removed, either because they've died or become dangerous. Over the last few years, a number of such trees have been removed in Wisterson Ward. Each time I've asked for them to be replaced, the view taken has been that the council doesn't replace them due to the overall cost involved, including ongoing maintenance. If you want details of these specific locations, I can supply them, but I didn't think it was appropriate today. But in view of the air quality discussion, etc., that you will be embarking on just a bit later, I'd like you to think about that one. Thank you.
Councillor Mannion, did you want to reply to that?
I think it's actually more appropriate for Councillor Crane, because I think what Councillor Simon's referring to, or if you mentioned grass verges, there would be trees on land under the control of the Highway Authority, rather than trees in open space, and which I'm responsible for. So I think it might be one more appropriate for Councillor Crane to pick up.
Before I hand over to Councillor Crane, I'd like to make the point that from a principal point of view, I do want to see a lot more trees planted. And I believe we planted 6,000 trees in the first planting season of this year, which I'm very pleased about. But I do accept the point that Councillor Crane might wish to comment further on, that when you come to highways, there are areas where you have to make sure you get the right sort of tree, if trees are appropriate at all. Now, do submit to Councillor Margaret Simon, do submit the details if you'd like to get a detailed answer on why specific areas are not being recommended for planting trees. Councillor Laura Crane, did you want to come in now?
Yes, if you don't mind. Thank you, Leader, and thank you for the question, Councillor Simon. The tree policy is something that we are actually reviewing at present. The policy that we inherited did, as you are aware, mean that in the majority of instances where a tree had to be removed, it has not been replaced. But that is something that I'm keen to see going into the new policy, that we will be replacing as many trees as is feasible to do so, obviously taking into account the safety aspect and the ongoing maintenance, but it is something that we need to be doing if we're going to be reaching our climate targets. So yes, thankfully you should hopefully be seeing a review of that policy very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sally Holland, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you very much, and hello everybody. My question really is regarding when last month Robert Jenrick, the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, announced that the 3.2 billion funding which was made available for councils, the latest tranche of 1.6 billion included a larger share earmarked for lower tier councils such as parish and town councils. So I'm just wondering how Cheshire East is considering distributing those funds, how much and what it will be used for. And I suppose that's directed more so towards portfolio holders for communities and also finance, but anybody, any portfolios holders who want to give a comment, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could make a comment first before bringing in Councillor Warren. I was smiling when you were asking the question because credit to Robert Jenrick, he has been having conference calls with all council leaders weekly, and there's an opportunity to ask questions at those during a chat facility. During one of the chat facilities, I asked the question, what funding will be available for town and parish councils? Particularly, I'm a Sandbach Town Councillor, thinking of Sandbach Town Hall, which is closed at the moment, so the Town Council is losing revenue as a result of that. I did get the answer back, which pushed the buck firmly back to me, as that the upper tier authority would be expected to resolve that issue. So the 1.6 billion, we are told, contains an element to help out town and parish councils, but we have no further details on that, and I think it's left up to the upper tier authority to decide that. I don't think we've set up a scheme yet, but I have spoken to Chowk about this issue. Councillor Mick Warren, did you want to say any more on that?
Thanks, Leader. I do apologise, Sally, you were dropping in and out during most of your question there. I'm having quite a bad reception this afternoon. Can you just repeat the question again, please?
Yeah, it was just that we've got 1.6 billion tranche of funding coming from central government, and it's up to local authorities to decide how they distribute that to the lower tiers, such as town and parish councils. So hopefully you've heard me, and hopefully you can answer that as to where it will be directed, how much and when. Thank you.
It's possibly a question for Amanda rather than myself, but on the communities front, we are setting up a fund that community groups and charities can apply for, part of the recovery phase of the COVID pandemic. So I'm going to throw it across to Amanda. I think she's more savvy with the pounds than I am.
Okay, Councillor Amanda Stott, on the finance side, did you want to say anything?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Warren, for that. Thank you, Councillor Holland, for your question. As Councillor Corcoran's already said, yes, we were aware of the letter that was sent by Robert Jenrick to town and parish councils. I think at the moment, the sort of almost £20 million that has been distributed, that's come to Cheshire East, has mainly been used to fund the financial impact of lost income, for instance, where a facility is actually closed, but also to cover additional expenditure such as purchasing the very essential PPE equipment that our carers need. But as Councillor Corcoran said, we do recognise that town and parishes are going to suffer because a lot of their income does come from rental income of buildings and facilities. There is the council's People Helping People initiative. So I would say if there are ways that Cheshire East can help by giving support, that perhaps the organisations make direct contact with the relevant portfolio holder, that may be of more use to them rather than a general questioning to me. Does that help?
Yes, thank you very much. That's great, councillors, and I will report that back. I know that Congleton Town Council, we've earmarked at least £50,000 to help members of the public throughout this crisis. So, we're thinking if there's money there that we can recoup, then that's obviously what we want to do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Laura Crane, did you wish to comment on this item?
I don't have anything additional to add. I think everybody's covered that nicely. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Josh Saunders, do you have a question to ask? I know Josh is around, so I'll come back to Councillor Josh Saunders in a minute. Is Councillor Rachel Bailey here now? No.
Hello, Leader. Yes, I am. I'm afraid my signal's not great because it comes across fields and the wind's knocking it off, on and off. So apologies, I wasn't able to respond before. I think my question has been answered in that Councillor Laura Crane has helpfully announced the reopening of the household waste recycling centres. She kindly corresponded with me 2 weeks ago because of the impact that we knew that these closures were having, not only in terms of the environment and the hideous crime of fly tipping, but also vulnerable residents were being blighted by scammers on some occasions. Can Councillor Crane confirm that when the sites reopen next week, it is pan Cheshire? I am conscious that we are behind Merseyside and Manchester. And I think it's important that all Cheshire authorities are available at the same time to avoid a surge in a particular area. I am conscious that Cheshire West were very clear in their messaging on their website when they were one of the 85% across the country to close their waste recycling, that they clearly said that operatives were needed to support services elsewhere. I think that reassured their residents, whereas there has been uncertainty with people from within my ward and beyond who've responded to me. or queried it with me. So please can you confirm that it's a pan-Cheshire reopening, how we will message that, and again, I would like to reiterate my thanks to the operatives that have been continuing with the door collection so effectively. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the question. I think perhaps we should supply you with a written answer to that, because it does involve other councils, and we should probably agree with them first before stating anything to do with with other authorities. Councillor Laura Crane, was there anything you wanted to add now?
No, I think you've covered that admirably. Thank you, Councillor Bailey.
Okay, thank you. Is Councillor Josh Saunders available now?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine, and I think we'll get your picture in a minute. Yes, we've got your picture as well.
Oh, how lovely. Right, my question is to Councillor Laura Judah, and the question is as follows. We have a very large percentage of elderly people in Cheshire East who are residents in care homes and residential settings. This sector, as we well know, is facing unprecedented challenges at the moment. But we also have to look towards the future as well. And I have been contacted by both key workers and relatives who are worried about their jobs and possible closures of the homes in terms of the economic sustainability of this area. We cannot expect self-funders to be the sole answer, as their finances are potentially affected by reduced dividends, etc. So what I wanted to ask was, can Councillor Judah briefly outline what support is available now and the plans for future support? And can she also state when this information will be communicated publicly to care homes, residents of Cheshire East, and to members of this council? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Laura Judah.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders, for your question. The latter part, I can tell you what's happened, is that Cheshire East have sent a letter out to all care homes asking them to itemise the extra expense they've incurred through COVID. But the other support that they're offering to care homes, and there are 92 of them, as you're aware, across Cheshire East, is that they've been helping them out with staff shortages, and also if they experienced any shortage of PPE. The rest of your question, I think, will have to be a written answer. But I do have quite a bit of information, substantial information on the current situation in care homes, and I can let you have that today. But about the future, I'm going to have to come back to you with the answer after I've consulted councillors. I think we've got to, recognise that this is a situation that we've never ever encountered before, and of course we sort of it's been very reactive, I think, the response to care homes. But I would like to say that it's really important to acknowledge the work and the resourcefulness and tenacity of some of Cheshire East staff in securing especially PPE and supporting those care homes with daily phone calls and offering whatever support that they can.
Thank you for the answer, and thank you for the question. Councillor Kate Parkinson, and then after that it'll be Councillor Liz Wardlaw. So Kate Parkinson.
Hi there. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, and I can see you
everyone.
well. The system
Hi
works.
Everyone. My question is to the Deputy Leader and also members, senior members of the Council, to do with HS2. My question is, as the Council settles down into a new routine in these unusual times, I feel it's important that we re-establish scrutiny functions to keep elected members informed on decision making and responses. Sorry, my cat's in the way. Sorry, one second. Sorry, I'll start that again. As the council settles down into a new routine in these unusual times, I feel it's important that we re-establish the council's scrutiny functions to keep elected members informed on decision making and responses to the strategic consultations. I'm specifically concerned about this council's response to the current HS2B consultations. In my own ward, Highley, the parish council has been busy constructing their response. Highley ward understandably does not want the proposed passive provisions for the Manchester to Liverpool and Liverpool to London junctions at Highley for the reasons expressed in their response. Despite repeated correspondence to Cheshire East officers, we have received no replies to our queries. We are trying to get accurate information from this cabinet, but we are currently reliant on information from outside sources instead of getting clear and accurate information from this council on behalf of the residents we serve. I would like to know first, why have these legitimate inquiries not been answered? And second, why has the council not engaged with ward members like myself, whose wards are directly and negatively impacted by these proposals, in terms of collating a balanced Cheshire East response to this important strategic consultation? I look forward to receiving a detailed response if it needs to be written, because the consultation submission date is ending very soon. So thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Councillor Craig Brown, do you want to respond now or provide a written answer as requested?
I'll respond very briefly. Yes, clearly that's a very detailed question which does justify a written response. Clearly phase 2B is still quite a long way away as we stand at the moment, but yes, I do take on board Councillor Parkinson's concerns, and I will make sure that a written response is provided, and we can perhaps take offline the discussion around the scrutiny function that she refers to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And the final question, Councillor Liz Wardlaw.
Oh, yes, thank you. I'll keep mine brief, and it kind of relates a little bit into what Kate was just saying about communication. It's so important at this time when we're physically isolated from family, colleagues and our residents. And with this in mind, my question really is, you know, whilst we are receiving updates about everything COVID, why is it that we're only hearing today the announcement about the waste recycling facilities opening when it was all over social media at the weekend? I would have liked to have known about it before social media, or at least had some heads up on it. When I'm having inquiries from press and residents about fly tipping, it would have been helpful to be able to say that this was impending. There are other things that we're having inquiries on, such as mortality rates within our nursing homes. And so my point is really that if we could possibly stay ahead of the curve with communication, in order to ensure that we are not embarrassed by not having the facts and figures at our disposal, when in fact most of Cheshire already has them. Thank you very much.
I wasn't aware of this, what must have been just speculation on social media, but Councillor Laura Crane, did you wish to comment further?
Thank you, Leader, and thank you for the question. I can't answer why it was on social media at the weekend. I did spot a couple of comments, but put that down to pure speculation, given that surrounding areas were thinking of opening on a similar day. I'm not going to go digging for the mole. Obviously, somebody's let slip somewhere. I can understand the frustrations, and it was only set very recently, that date for reopening. We do need to get that agreement for our neighbouring authorities rather than going ahead alone, and that's taken a little time. So I apologise that you feel behind the curve on that one, but I promise that this wasn't something that I've put out there myself.
Thank you. Is there? No, I think that ends the councillor question time.
Sorry.
Hello.
Sorry, Leader, it's Amanda Stott.
Yes. Okay.
Sorry. So I was just going to respond to Councillor Wardlaw's questions about the concerns for members being kept updated. Every day an email does go out to all councillors, giving them all the latest information that we've received in the last 24 hours. If there are areas that anybody wants more information on, or you think there are topics that are not being covered, then by all means, please let me know, because you know, at the moment we're sort of just disseminating anything that is of general interest across the board, but there might be some more specific items that people would like to know about. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you. Sorry to those who are waiting for other items to come on the agenda. I know we've gone over time on that, but that's partly to give every person who wanted to speak an opportunity to speak. If I can now move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is the minutes of the previous meeting. If I could propose those as a true record of the meeting. Councillor Brown, do you wish to second that?
Yes, I'm happy to second that, Leader.
Are there any speakers on that? Anybody wishing to object to those minutes? Are there any abstentions on the proposal? In that case, could I ask all those in favour to say aye?
Aye.
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 Right. Any against? Any against? Right, thank you. I declare that carried by acclamation. I'm taking a sense of the meeting there. That's one of the ways for remote meetings to take the resolution to be approved. I will be using a more formal method for the other items on the agenda. If I can move on to item 6, which is the well-managed highways infrastructure. I will be asking Councillor Crane to make a proposal, then Councillor Crane to second. I will then ask Councillor Finglow to speak as the chair of the Environment Scrutiny Committee, which heard the call-in, and then ask Janet Clowes to speak on behalf of those who called in the decision. I will then invite other visiting members to speak before bringing the matter back into Cabinet for debate. So, Councillor Laura Crane, would you like to introduce this item and make a proposal?
Thank you. The report before you today outlines the call-in of the well-managed highway infrastructure cabinet decision. On the 4th of February this year, a paper relating to well-managed highways infrastructure was presented to Cabinet for consideration and was approved. The paper outlined proposed changes to the highway safety inspection policy, code of practice for highway safety inspections, the winter and adverse weather policy, the adverse weather plan and the Cheshire East Highways Resilient Network. Included in these proposals were changes to the winter treatment network. Further to the Cabinet decision, a call-in request was lodged and upheld by the monitoring officer. The call-in raised questions around the consultation process utilised to inform the changes in the proposals. The points that were raised in the call-in were considered by the Environment and Regeneration Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 16th of March 2020, and following consideration of the call-in, the committee provided advice which is set out in this report. It is therefore proposed to undertake the engagement as recommended by the Scrutiny Committee during the next round of the area highway groups, which are scheduled for late summer, autumn, giving further opportunity for parish and town councils, local members, cycle groups and schools as appropriate to highlight areas of the highway network which they feel should be included on the winter treatment network. Feedback will then be provided to these organisations. The alignment of the Council's policies and procedures with the recommendations in the original Cabinet report will allow resources to be more effectively targeted to address risks and manage safety on the highway network within the available budgets. This will see amendments to the winter service implemented in the 2022 winter season and amendments to highway safety inspections within the current financial year. I'd like to thank the scrutiny meeting for taking time to consider this and for providing their advice on this matter. As the portfolio holder, I can confirm to Cabinet that these proposals are capable of being implemented as part of the rollout of these revised policies. I therefore move the recommendations as outlined in section 2.1 of the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crane. Councillor Craig Brown, do you wish to second that proposal?
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I'm happy to second the proposal and reserve the right to speak later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If I could call on Councillor Paul Findlow to speak, and then I'll call Janet Clowes. If there are any other visiting members wishing to speak on this item, if you could use the chat facility to let me know you wish to speak. Councillor Paul Findlow.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, very well, thank you.
Very good. Well, I trust the minutes of the 16th of March of the Scrutiny Committee have been circulated. This was the first call-in most members present had attended, and I can report that it really went rather well, with very thorough examination of the principal issues at stake, culminating in agreement that significant advice on a particular issue, the one we're now considering, i.e. winter service and gritting, be offered to the Cabinet. We did learn some lessons from it for future reference, particularly how long it takes, particularly with other business, to conduct the such proceedings. All members present contributed with a focus on the lead call-in member and the 2 cabinet members who were also present. The advice offered is principally on page 14 of your agenda and reiterates in full the committee's minutes, which is gratifying. I think it is really pleasing that the committee's views are being acted on as has just been proposed. I would highlight from the committee's deliberations a couple of points, if I may. The scope of the advice, firstly, is restricted to the winter service aspect, particularly revisions to the proposed gritting policy, and the rest, which is the majority of the well-managed highway infrastructure issues, are not affected. Also, members were especially concerned at the adequacy of local ward member involvement in the consultation process. And also the gritting of roads came up in particular in proximity of schools, and schools' very limited participation in the consultation. And also the understanding by members and the public of the methodology utilised and the scoring criteria, resulting in some gritting routes being rescinded, and the adequacy, finally, of the area highway groups in the process in terms of their involvement, including particularly town and parish councils. We received responses from the cabinet members present, and further questions from members of the committee were posed relating to the importance of local member knowledge. There's no substitute for that, and the impact of delay, including the breakdown, which I've not seen, of the costs involved and how a further consultation could be structured, all which in totality results in the considered advice now before you. So the question remains, if I conclude, as to what the timetable for the proposals you're now adopting is, as now envisaged, and particularly given, for example, that some of the area highway groups, like mine in Poynton Group, have not met for very, very many months. I hope that timetable is available. Thank you, Chairman. That is but a summary. You do have the minutes before you, do you?
Mm-hmm.
Do the public? Do you?
I don't know whether the minutes, so you're talking for the agenda. Now, there's the agenda pack that has been published, which, as you say,
yes, the minutes of the committee I'm reporting on. Do you have them? Do the public have access?
Right, it's page 14 of the agenda.
Yes, yes.
We may be able to present that through the miracles of Microsoft Teams. Are you talking about the minutes of the Environment and Scrutiny Committee?
Yes, that's what I'm asked to report on. They usually, in normal circumstances, which we're not in, as you know, Chairman, circulated to members and the public present.
Yeah. Now, sorry, I think the point that you're making, we have got the extract from the agenda, the minutes.
That's true.
On page 14, but I think the point you're making is the full minutes of the Environment and Scrutiny Committee meeting that has happened, but you haven't had a subsequent meeting. So have your minutes been published?
No, they are the draft minutes, but right. Normally they are before the Cabinet.
We have the full scrutiny. We have the extract on page 14.
Yes, but you don't have the full minutes, which is normally the case. I mean, I can understand why in the changed circumstances.
Right.
Thank you.
If I could ask Councillor Janet Clowes, would you like to speak? And I'll follow up that point while Janet Clowes is speaking.
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, Janet, we can hear and see you.
Oh, lovely. Okay, thank you very much. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the Scrutiny Committee for the time they did spend at that meeting on the 16th of March. There was a very full, very robust debate. Everybody's views were heard. Some really good ideas came forward so that we hopefully don't repeat those similar errors in future. And I certainly welcome the recommendations on page 14 of our pack today. In terms of moving forward with this, of course, we couldn't really have expected that we would now have lockdown. And so the issues affecting any consultation are going to require some additional thinking to make sure that they are effective. I do have one concern about dependency on the local area highway groups, in the sense that they are normally spread across quite a wide timescale. Certainly I know that last year some areas were having theirs in June and July, ours were not until the very end of September. So I'm just wondering if it might be in the best interests of efficiency, in order to get this moving, that we actually programme our next local area highway meetings relatively soon, probably I would say about August, at the same time or within a couple of weeks, so that we can actually get those results together, and it would assist our teams, our officers, to get those programmes up and running as quickly as possible. That was really the only comment I would want to say at this stage. But again, thanks to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for a very good and valuable debate.
Thank you. Councillor Margaret Simon, did you wish to speak?
Thank you, Councillor Corcoran. Councillor Findlow touched on this point a little, but I've made a note to ask you, when considering replies from local sources to any further consultation regarding winter gritting, what weight will be given against the current criteria being used? Will it have? And in a nutshell, really, I'm asking, will local people with local knowledge be listened to? Thank you.
Thank you. I might ask Councillor Craig Brown to pick up on that point when it comes back into Cabinet. Are there any other visiting members wishing to speak? In that case, if I bring it back into Cabinet for debate, are there any Cabinet members wishing to speak?
Sorry, Leader. I was trying to write a message. I'm not obviously quick enough on this technology. May I just come back? It's Councillor Clowes.
You have already spoken on this item. So I can ask you to come back very briefly.
It was really just to say that in addition to the local area highways group meetings, it would be useful to have some idea in the context of COVID how we're going to liaise with our schools. That was all, but obviously quite an important area. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could make some comments, then bring it back into Cabinet. The new Labour Independent Administration appointed Conservative councillors to chair each of the Council's Overview and Scrutiny Committees. Scrutiny is supposed to review decisions taken by the administration and highlight any concerns. If Scrutiny is acting effectively, then any problems should be picked up without the need for a call-in. In July 2019, the Environment and Regeneration Overview and Scrutiny Committee discussed a new highways policy, made no complaints, nor suggested any changes. Further detailed discussion of the new policy took place at each of the Council's area highways groups. Having been approved at all these cross-party groups, the new policy was approved at Cabinet in February 2020. The Conservatives then called in the decision and insisted it be reviewed again by the same scrutiny committee that had reviewed it in 2019. The decision to call in and delay the implementation of the new highways policy is an abject failure of Conservative scrutiny. Criticism of the consultation was not reported by the scrutiny committee, nor was the criteria for deciding gritting routes challenged. The consultation that the Conservatives are complaining about had been carried out under the previous Conservative administration. Bizarrely, the Conservative leader claimed during the scrutiny review that the Conservative cabinet members were unaware of the public consultation that they were responsible for. This does raise serious questions about the way the Conservatives conducted themselves when in power and their slight regard for public consultation. How could Cabinet not be aware of a public consultation? And that consultation was approved by Councillor Don Stockton. Under the new policy, a score of 100 is needed for a road to be included on the gritting route schedule. The new objective criteria for assessing gritting routes show that 113 roads which are currently being gritted have a score of 0. Of these 113, 91 are in areas previously held by Conservative councillors. A statistical analysis shows that the chances of this happening, if there is no bias towards or against Conservative areas, is 1 in 5,000. Assuming a binomial distribution, I can say with 99% confidence that the hypothesis that the previous method had no bias towards conservative areas is false. Now, the effect of the Conservative call-in has been to delay the implementation of the new objectively assessed gritting routes by a year, meaning that all those routes assessed as not qualifying will still be gritted in 2021 at a cost of £230,000. I should stress the distinction that any issues over the scoring of particular gritting routes can be addressed through the review process before the new gritting routes are implemented. But the principle has to be that there is an objective scoring system and that the party political affiliation of the councillor is not a factor in determining whether the road is gritted. That principle is enshrined in the new policy recommended for approval today. The call-in has delayed many other good improvements, including a lower depth of pothole to be repaired on cycle routes. I strongly support approving the policy today so that these good improvements can be implemented without further delay. Thank you. Councillor Craig Brown, you reserved the right to speak earlier. Do you wish to speak now as the seconder of the motion?
Yes, I'll do that now, Leader. Thank you very much. I do actually welcome the recommendations proposed in the report. They are fair and they're also reasonable. My only disappointment with it is that members of the Conservative group didn't propose them at the time that Cabinet considered the original report. Had these recommendations been presented to Cabinet prior to its consideration of Well-Managed Highways Initiative on the 4th of February, they could have been included in the report and the changes implemented in the current financial year. We are mindful that the call-in was instigated by a group of Conservative councillors, some of whom sat in Cabinet at the time the original consultation was designed and carried out, yet at the time saw no issues with that consultation process. But having said that, we will of course engage with town and parish councils as well as schools in a review of the winter service programme. We had in fact already committed to an annual review of the programme in any case, so in that sense the call-in has not made any difference. The difference that the call-in has made is to cost the council money. The Highway Safety Inspection Policy, which is part of the Well-Managed Highways Initiative, requires us to carry out pothole inspections to a depth of 40 millimetres rather than the previous 50 millimetres, and inevitably that increases the number of inspections that will be needed. The estimated £230,000 cost of these additional inspections was to be offset through cost savings in the winter service programme, which as a result of the call-in can no longer be programmed for the current financial year and therefore create an in-year financial pressure. It's likely that this pressure will now have to be met by cuts to other services instead. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Laura Crane, did you wish to sum up the debate?
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I think I'll just refer to my notes on the questions that have come up. I think quickly there, the minutes of the Environment and Regeneration Overview and Scrutiny meeting were not included in full in this package, but we have got the highlights and the parts that refer to the call-in. So we have had the full information available to all of our Cabinet members. We also have the cost was raised by somebody there. We have this will all be within available resources. There's no concern on that one. With regard to the area highway group meetings, because we won't be implementing until the 21-22 winter service, we do have plenty of time. We've got the potentially 3 area highway group meetings in each area between now and then. We should be able to get these to get this discussed at the next one as soon as we're able to instigate meetings, including social distancing, of course. Yes, I hope that everybody will take part in this consultation, and local member input will be taken on a case-by-case basis, leading to an additional risk assessment if areas are raised that we do need to be looking at. So I thank you all, and I hope that Cabinet can consider this paper. Thank you.
Right, thank you. The recommendations on page 13 and 14 of the report have been moved and seconded, and hopefully will be displayed on your screen shortly. I will now invite each member of Cabinet in alphabetical order to confirm their support for the proposition, or otherwise by stating for, against or not voting. So, Councillor Craig Brown.
For.
Sam Corcoran, for. Laura Crane.
For.
Catherine Flavelle.
For.
Connie Fox.
For.
Laura Judah.
For.
Nick Mannion.
For.
Bill Rhodes.
For.
Amanda Stott.
For.
Mick Warren.
For.
So, that is carried unanimously. Thank you. If I could move on to item 7 on the agenda, which is the Cheshire East Environment Strategy. Councillor Nick Mannion, I believe you wish to make a proposal.
Thank you, Leader. This report seeks the approval of the Council's and adoption of the Council's Environment Strategy following the round of public consultation that was recently completed. The Council committed itself last May to develop an environment strategy to respond to the global challenge of climate change and to protect and enhance the environment throughout our borough. The strategy sets out our key 6 strategic goals. 1. Cheshire East Council will be carbon neutral by 2025. 2. To reduce waste. 3. To improve air quality. 4. To ensure new development is sustainable. And on key outcome number 5, there is a word missing on page 61. The word active is missing, so it should read increase sustainable travel and active travel. And 5 is to protect and enhance our natural environment. The strategy highlights the key points and action plans that we've already developed to ensure that we deliver on these goals and to provide strong local environmental leadership and stewardship across Cheshire East. It also identifies the key areas that require further work and development. In particular, the work we need to do to improve sustainable travel choices, active travel choices, and to provide further detailed environmental planning policies to ensure that new development includes measures to reduce carbon emissions and to mitigate climate change. The report provides an overview of the response from the public consultation, which attracted over 450 responses from residents, local groups and national lobby groups. And the summary report is included as an appendix to the strategy. The full report is available on the Council's website as well. The report responds to the notice of motion also proposed by Councillor Abel at the Council meeting of the 19th of December 2019 relating to the environmental impact of new development. Can I now refer you to the recommendations as set out in section 2.1 of the report? And I recommend to Cabinet the approval of the environmental strategy and that agreement that the Council writes to the Community Secretary advocating that the requirements for new build homes should meet world leading levels of energy efficiency be brought forward to be enacted at the earliest possible date. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Councillor Mannion, can I just confirm that you're proposing section 2.1 in its entirety? And
I am, Leader, yes.
And I would wish to speak seconding that proposal. It is good to see this document come back to Cabinet, enhanced and strengthened following public consultation. I was pleased by comments from members of the public and opposition councillors that the previous documents did not go far enough. I agree with those comments, and despite in the next item on the agenda having some of the most ambitious and detailed plans in the country on carbon reduction, I still feel that more is required. My pleasure at seeing this strategy come before Cabinet is tempered by annoyance that we can't also adopt the motion proposed by Councillor Quentin Abel to require developers to adopt best practice to reduce carbon emissions. To explain why. In 2015, the then government announced that it would introduce an amendment to the Planning and Energy Act that would restrict local authorities from setting higher energy standards for new homes. Although this amendment has not yet been commenced, the lack of action by the government since 2015 and the clear statement from the government restricting activity by local authorities has led to confusion and uncertainty for both local planning authorities and home builders. So whilst the council can welcome, encourage and look favourably upon development which incorporates best practice to reduce carbon emissions, the current planning policy framework set by the government means that it cannot be required. This is an area that the council will continue to monitor. I am also pleased to see the reduce, reuse, recycle philosophy set out in section 5.7 of the report. We should first seek to reduce the amount of waste produced. Secondly, reuse where possible, and thirdly, recycle. I thank all the staff who have maintained all our curbside waste collections during the current crisis, including the silver wheelie bin recycling service and the garden waste collections, which now include food waste. So I'm happy to second the proposals. If I could move it out to visiting members. I have a number of visiting members who wish to speak. They are Councillor Susie Akers-Smith, Rachel Bailey, Janet Clowes, Tony Dean, Paul Findlow and Quentin Abel. If I could take those in order. Councillor Susie Akers-Smith, do you wish to speak? I'll come back to Councillor Susie Akers-Smith.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can now hear you.
Sorry, yeah, sorry, thank you. It was just a few questions. The Environment Strategy proposal has many excellent measures for reducing our carbon footprint, but in terms of carbon emissions, the document could be significantly improved to enable Cheshire East residents in choosing to walk and cycle for short journeys into and out of the town centres, where vehicle journeys of less than 1 mile account for over 60% across the borough. So with that in mind, I'd like to ask, the strategy was written before we declared a climate change emergency. Before accepting it for approval, would it be possible to revisit the sections on improved air quality and sustainable transport and active travel with a view to working with the officers to look at revising the content? Secondly, the document puts great emphasis on electric vehicles to improve air quality and reduce carbon emissions. The mining and disposal of electric vehicle batteries are detrimental to the environment. Electric cars do not reduce congestion, and brake dust and tyre wear and tear contribute to air pollution and are damaging our seas. Electric vehicles are not the panacea to climate change, and I would like to see this section consider alternative fuel technologies such as hydrogen and methane. Can this be revisited? In addition, there was at the Overview and Scrutiny Committee in March, there were such targeted measures that would really help us create the environment for climate change. So implementing so many kilometres of traffic-free connected cycleways each year, more advanced stop lines, more toucan and zebra crossings, and these recommendations are not in any of the report or the carbon action plan. And you know, the biggest influence to improve our air quality, as you well know, is reduce congestion and create nicer places to live, is for people to walk and cycle more. And I believe further contributions specifically to these two sections will create the environment strategy that will help us achieve our climate change ambitions by 2025.
Thank you. We will come back on those comments when it comes back into Cabinet. Councillor Rachel Bailey, did you wish to speak?
Yes, please. Thank you, Leader. I welcome the report, and in particular the manner in which the appendices, particularly Appendices 1, references the work to date. The environment and care of the environment should never stop, and it's always about having that actual base and that starting point and continued evolution. If we look at example in Appendix 1, the improvement of air quality and the recognition that has been made in the work that was done in 2018 and the confirmation by DEFRA that we have a highly detailed plan and show great care for air quality is very welcome and a perfect platform for the next stage. I say that because it's about building that platform. In terms of building the platform, I'm sure others may just question on the recommendation 2.1.2, the requirement for the portfolio holder for environment and regeneration to make further revisions to the strategy. That doesn't fit with my sense of a collective environment strategy, particularly when my memory tells me that council as a whole was supportive of the refresh and building on the environment strategy. I'm sure others will ask about that. My main concern, however, is the response to the consultation on the environment strategy is key. And I think it absolutely shows how everyone is in it together. That includes partners. The document is very welcome, but how will we use and work with those partners in the future? For example, the NFU have responded to this consultation. I don't see the comments that I'm aware they've made summarised, but I know that their input, just like input from health partners in terms of page 4 of the environment strategy, which references a programme of campaigns will be delivered to raise awareness, nudge people to simple changes and day-to-day lifestyle changes to reduce their carbon footprint. I have no issue with good education and messaging, but what oversight will there be of that for ward members and for partners that have been involved? Will there be a working subgroup, cross-party, or will scrutiny be allowed to play a role, or will our champion be able to take a lead in this? And by the way, I also finally would want to endorse the comments made of another champion, Susie Akers-Smith, with regard to electric cars not being the panacea, and that we have to take into account the impact and disposal of the batteries. And that's the nub of it when we come to the environment. We can fix one thing, but actually by so doing, the impact on the other can be catastrophic. I ask that the portfolio holder, Councillor Mannion, considers cross-party consultation, working group, regular updates to scrutiny. I would anticipate seeing a formal governance to ensure that this is cohesive and open. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your comments. Again, we'll come back on those when it comes back into Cabinet. Councillor Janet Clowes.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Well, Councillor Bailey has said some of what I'm going to cover, but certainly this is a very ambitious strategy and I welcome it. Responses from the public are very welcome indeed, and I share some of Mr. Backhouse's concerns, who spoke in the public speaking section earlier, in that he praised the ambition but felt that in places it was a weak document, and I would endorse what he has asked for and that has been promised, and that is robust targets that will be built into this. In terms of moving forward with this, I too have some concerns about recommendation 2.1.2, in that this strategy covers virtually every area of the council, and much as I respect my colleague Councillor Mannion, I would like to see that other portfolio holders and appropriate officers were also involved in evaluating and deciding upon any further changes or revisions to this strategy. It's too important a strategy to miss things out. In terms of particular issues that caught my attention, clearly in Winbury Ward we are rich with peat and meres and mosses. Their value to our environment strategy are immense, and so their protection is something very dear to my heart. The sequestration elements of the strategy, particularly tree planting, again are important, and we need to think about our own land assets and how we use those, particularly as in other items further on in today's papers. We also seek to use our own assets for other purposes. Our land assets are not going to stretch in all those directions all of the time. So in terms of moving forward with this, I welcome it. but I would agree that a revision in 2022 is actually a little bit too late in the time frame that we have to 2025. I think this needs to be a continual rolling process of revisions of those aspects of the strategy that are being looked at any one time. The best place for that is through consultation, obviously, and through a review and scrutiny, or whatever it takes its place when we move to a computer system. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Councillor Tony Dean.
Right, can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly.
Very good. Yes, just to reiterate actually what Councillor Clowes has said, is about item 2.1.2 on page 50. The recommendation to authorise portfolio holder to make further revisions to the strategy. That's basically how it's put. I also believe that this strategy is too important, and leaving adjustments to portfolio holder on its own is a dangerous precedent as a recommendation for such a key strategy. So I think that, you know, I support Councillor Clowes in saying that it needs to be another approved suitable group that makes any adjustments to this, not just the portfolio holder on their own, but just to make sure we get proper scrutiny of any such changes. And the second thing, I think it would be good if this report, and I suppose this is a recommendation really for the future, the report in item 7 or its appendices could have helped by including a list of the changes made to the draft strategy following the consultation. There is a real extremely good list of responses to the consultation, but I couldn't find, and I might have missed it, which of those responses were adopted and changes made and which weren't, without going through the whole strategy again and looking for changes between the draft and the strategy as it's produced today. But overall, it's an excellent document. We should be doing it. It needs to be reviewed regularly. I agree with Councillor Clowes on that, to keep it a living document because things are moving so fast. And the other point made about it being tied into all kinds of other strategies like the economic strategy, agriculture in this country, roads, etc., etc., is very important. It can't stand on its own. It has to be looked at in conjunction with everything it impacts upon. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Findler.
Thank you, Chairman. My duty, as you know, is to report on the deliberations of the Scrutiny Committee on the 16th of March. All the more important, I think, if I assume correctly, as with the last item, that the draft minutes are not before you. So I will attempt to do so. The comments, whilst noting the committee noting the environment strategy and the carbon action plan, it asked the Cabinet to consider a range of comments, and I'll summarise the principal ones if I may. First of all, there was an emphasis that there was a lot more to do for the Council to be able to become carbon neutral by the ambitious year 2025, and few other local authorities, it's understood, have been that ambitious. But the strategy itself was broadly welcomed by the committee. Particular specific items mentioned were a bus strategy should be published as soon as possible. There should be a think cycle policy, more safer cycleways and use of electric cycles. Some of these items I know have been touched on by others already. Also, there should be a timeline for the Council's actions and projects in the run-up to 2025, coupled with an annual progress review. Electric charging points should be addressed, was mentioned, and sustainable travel was needed to be given a greater emphasis. It was also questioned whether the programme was excessively ambitious, one suggestion being that perhaps 2034 was more realistic than 2025, ? The adequacy of the capital funding was also queried, and greater specificity was recommended as to contributing to reducing CO2 levels, and also at what is constituted by inset actions. Personally, the two points I wanted to make have been adequately covered already, but I would just reiterate, I noticed the portfolio holder removing the recommendations omitted 2.1.2, referring, and this is the word which I really object to and which I think is quite unconscionable and exceptional, The word any is all embracing any further revisions, no matter how fundamental. You are delegating the path and to be revised. Now, I'm not suggesting that would happen necessarily in practice. Is it a mere omission of the word technical, Chairman? Any technical further revisions? I have seen such phraseology before, but not any as printed. Perhaps you could enlighten us on that point in particular.
Thank you for your comments. I will come back on those in more detail when the debate comes back into Cabinet, but just on the legal point over what has been proposed, it is, as I specified and clarified with Councillor Mannion, the entirety of the recommendations in 2.1 of the agenda pack. Councillor Quentin Abel, do you wish to speak?
Yes, please. Good afternoon. I'd like to quickly thank my Cabinet colleagues for the actual privilege of serving with them in the Cabinet. It's been very educational. Going to environmental policy, I'd like to thank Councillor Simon for mentioning the highways and replanting trees where trees are being taken out. That is certainly an area which we need to have another really good look at. I think the flavour of this has absolutely made me strongly believe that the introduction of the committee system is hugely beneficial, because it allows the combined brain power of all our members to be involved in moving things of this nature forward. And I feel very strongly that we need to take this opportunity to combine the scrutiny committee and other interested members to move us forward on our environmental strategy, because it is a developing document. And the purpose of this original thing was a question to the portfolio holder. I interestingly was very pleased to see that he had the power to make changes, because I know that Nick will be capable of taking on board other people's views and moving things forward. And my question was actually, in view of the current coronavirus crisis and the changes this has made to all our lifestyles, would he agree with me that it is worth reviewing the strategy document through this lens, with particular emphasis on our broadband and our communities, the importance of broadband that we've suddenly realised for both work interactions and councillor interactions, and indeed officer interactions. The difference it has made to the number of journey miles taken. One area we thought we would never be able to tackle was the commute to work. But I'm pleased to say that anytime you wish to find a parking space at Westfields, it is a doddle and is readily accessible. And just the joy of being out there, as Susie A. Smith has said, of being out there and being able to walk and breathe, and you now smell one vehicle going past and you immediately know that the air quality has been reduced. And even I, as have managed to get out on a bicycle and don't feel intimidated by car users, at least the majority of them, and have had the pleasure and joy of riding around our countryside. Indeed, even our towns, the joy and breathing of availability. So I strongly recommend to you all that we need to get on with this and make it happen, and two, that we have got to get ourselves together and really move this forward. We've touched lightly on housing problems and our inability to compel our developers to do the right thing. I would ask their board of directors, who I hope have children and potentially grandchildren, to, in the light of the current crisis, look to the future and say that if you're building a property, okay, if it's a throwaway house that's only there for 5 years, so what? But if it's something that you intend to be a quality item, then it really shouldn't be contributing to carbon and increase in carbon, and therefore should not have gas boilers. It should be, when you break the ground, it is a relatively cheap thing to do. And if you went out and did market research again with your staff to your potential customers, the joy of living in a house where you have no energy bills would be immense. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Councillor Abel. If I could bring it back into Cabinet, I have a few points I wanted to come back on, but I'll open it up to other Cabinet members first. Was there any Cabinet member wish to comment? Right. In that case, if I could pick up on a few points. Firstly, Councillor Susie Akers-Smith as the cycling and walking champion. Yes, cycling and walking are the gold standard that we should be aiming for. I do have an electric car and it's not being used very much. With the lovely weather we've had, it's actually now fully charged up by the solar panels that I have. But I cycled into Westfields today, and it is a joy to cycle at the moment with, as Quentin Abel says, much less traffic on the roads. The other comments that were made, working together with partners, that will come up again under item 8, but we will be encouraging partners to reduce their carbon emissions and working strongly with them. In terms of the oversight, I do look to the Environment Scrutiny Committee to look into this and to review this, but I wouldn't dream of dictating to Councillor Findlow as chair of that comment what the Scrutiny Committee should do. That's a matter for them to decide. And also to look to our champions, the Environment champion Councillor Quentin Abel and the Cycling and Walking champion Susie Akers-Smith. I'm sure they will continue to hold our feet to the fire to ensure that we do implement this environment strategy and go beyond it. The other point I was picking up was over concerns over item 2.1.2, delegating authority to the portfolio holder to make any further revisions to the strategy, but also concerns over the length of time before the next formal review. I think those two items go together, and that in the intervening time, I think we do need some flexibility here. So I support item 2.1.2, but I'm sure that those powers will not be misused. Are there, if I could then hand over to Councillor Nick Mannion to sum up on this debate.
Thank you, Leader. Firstly is a reassurance to Councillor Bailey, Councillor Clowes and Councillor Dean on their concerns about recommendation 2.12. Obviously, any future revisions made by the portfolio holder under the current constitution, and obviously that's what we're working at the moment, have to be published. And again, I am more than happy to do a 6-monthly or annual update on the implementation of the strategy to the relevant overview and scrutiny committee. Other than that, really, what I would say is the strategy sets out our vision. It's a strategic document. It plans the campaign. How we're going to actually deliver the commitments we make in the strategy will be through the action plans. Again, the next item on the agenda is the carbon action plan. We're committed to a bus strategy. We're committed to town plans, which also are relevant to the rural areas around those towns. So again, it's the cornerstone of our commitment to being carbon neutral as an organisation by 2025. And I can assure members that any revisions will be published, and obviously they will be subject to scrutiny by Councillor Findlow's Overview and Scrutiny Committee, the Environment and Regeneration Committee. I trust that reassures people. Again, we're at the start, we're at the end of the beginning. In a way, we're at the start of a journey towards 2025. And again, whilst we've got a major milestone in 2022, I am happy to report progress to members between today's date, if it's approved by Cabinet, and the formal review of the strategy in 2022 through the Council's current or future scrutiny provisions. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much. The recommendations on page 50 of the report have been moved and seconded in their entirety. I will invite each member of Cabinet in alphabetical order to confirm their support for the proposition or otherwise by stating for, against or not voting. Councillor Craig Brown.
For.
Myself, Councillor Sam Corcoran, for. Councillor Laura Crane.
For.
Catherine Gravel.
For.
Tony Fox.
For.
Laura Tudor.
For.
Nick Mannion.
For.
Jill Rhodes.
For.
Amanda Stott.
For.
Mick Warren.
For.
Again, that is carried unanimously. Thank you. If I can move on to item 8, which is the Cheshire East Carbon Action Plan. Again, Councillor Nick Mannion, would you like to introduce this item and make a proposal?
Thank you, Leader. Again, we've just formally adopted our environmental strategy, and this is the first element of starting to deliver that. The Carbon Action Plan sets out how we plan to deliver our ambition to be carbon neutral by 2025. This will also influence reduction in the borough's carbon footprint. It contains recommendations for a number of principles to support our carbon ambitions. For example, setting high environmental standards of our own buildings, moving to reduce the use of vehicles that use cleaner fuels, and becoming a full partner of the Northern Forest Scheme. This is the first time Cheshire East has produced a carbon action plan to achieve carbon neutrality, but it builds upon the previous carbon management plan, which had already cut emissions by 55% since 2010. It has been produced in response to the unanimous approval of a motion that the council passed at the annual council on the 22nd of May last year to become carbon neutral by 2025 and to influence the footprint of the borough as a whole, beyond the council's own estate and activities. The action plan's a core element of our environmental strategy, which outlines how we will deliver a better, greener Cheshire East. No council is currently carbon neutral, but we are not alone in setting ambitious targets, with almost 2/3 of authorities with a similar commitment, with most aiming to be carbon neutral by or around the year 2030. In addition, the council has been successful in securing an offer of £700,000 from the local growth fund towards the proposed £2 million Crewe heat network, geothermal network. This report also seeks to approve to accept this grant. This will enable us to start construction by the end of this financial year, subject to securing an additional £1 million from the Future High Streets Fund for Crewe and also any planning permissions. I therefore recommend to Cabinet that they approve the recommendations as set out in section 2.1 of the report on pages 106 and 107 of your agenda. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, and I would like to second that proposal. Whilst the environment strategy sets out the aspiration, it's a strategy. The Carbon Action Plan sets out the detail of how the aspirations will be achieved. And with reference back to the comments by Mr. Andrew Backhouse earlier, the goal of Cheshire East Council being carbon neutral by 2025 is one of the most ambitious in the country. But in my view, that will be the easy part. It's the part that is under our control. The more difficult part, set out in this plan, is to encourage businesses, residents and organisations in Cheshire East to reduce their carbon footprint by reducing energy consumption and promoting healthy lifestyles. We've seen in the last few weeks how adaptable and resilient we can be when we have to. That determination and will needs to be carried on. Many people have commented on the positive aspects of recent changes: improved air quality, less traffic on the roads, safer cycling, hearing the birds singing, and a generally friendlier and more supportive society. There are some aspects of previous lifestyles that we do not wish to bring back. We have an opportunity to reset our lives and our communities. Looking to the future, I would like to see more cycling and walking, increased use of technology to allow home working and remote meetings, reducing unnecessary travel. I hope that the small-scale hydroelectric schemes in Congleton and in Nantwich do come to fruition. And we've already started. 6,000 trees were planted earlier this year, and more are planned in the next tree planting season. We are leading the way on this. Cheshire is renowned as a green county. If you think of Cheshire, you think of green fields. I want Cheshire East to be at the forefront of carbon reduction, attracting new green businesses, developing low carbon technologies. The environment strategy sets out a vision. The action plan shows that we mean business. If I can invite, are there any visiting members wishing to speak? And I have registered Janet Clowes, Tony Dean, Rod Fletcher, Rachel Bailey, Paul Findlow and Quentin Abel. So if I could start with Councillor Janet Clowes.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, we welcome this document. As you say, it is, if you like, a first detailed statement evaluating and illustrating the functionality of the strategy that's just been approved. I think what's really important here is that I welcome the ideas in terms of 4.2, green investment opportunities for additional offsetting. But again, it's use of land assets of Cheshire East that we may want to actually consider for using other things as well. But I welcome seeing it there, because actually when we were preparing our shadow budget proposals, we were looking at this, and at that time we were told it was not feasible. So I'm really glad you're going to look at it again. In terms of 2.1.26, again, it's a bit of a theme of mine in peat and boglands, meres and mosses, and peat moss restoration. Really, really important areas here. Both on our own land, but I think there's a real role for Cheshire East to play with organisations like Natural England, who are having a really difficult time in terms of financing and getting support for the wider restoration of these important ecological and environmental assets. So with those thoughts in mind, we've done really well in Cheshire East to have reduced our carbon footprint by over 50% since Cheshire East was set up. But as you say, there is more to do, and we are keen to get started on it. But as I say, it must be done with those very clear objectives and timeframes in mind. But I'm sure from what Councillor Mannion has said, we will be able to review those on a regular basis going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could ask Councillor Tony Dean, did you wish to speak on this item?
Hopefully you can now hear me, Leader.
I can, yes.
Okay. I think this is a good and very detailed piece of consultancy work by Anthesis, and it gives us a detailed action plan for a great number of actions and some not insignificant expenditure between now and 2025. But I hope everybody else has spotted amidst the smoke and mirrors, it doesn't actually make us carbon neutral by 2025, which is our stated aim. A couple of issues for me. The actions that we're taking only reduce the council's current 15,500 tonnes per annum of direct CO2 emissions by 2,005 tonnes per annum. Coupled with the nationally led decarbonisation of the electricity grid, which will reduce during that same period by another 4,090 tonnes, this still leaves 2/3 of our 15,000 tonne emissions to be tackled, i.e. 9,352 tonnes. The plan states we will tackle this in as yet undetailed ways by buying more green electricity, by being involved in carbon-free energy production projects in the borough, and by increasing the amount of CO2 absorbed in the borough by sequestration actions such as tree planting. The tree planting detail is also left open. On page 191, it states, if the council was to aim to further reduce the residual 2025 emissions through nature-based solutions, it would need to develop the range in the range of 141 to 1,447 hectares of land to sequester carbon. Now, Nick Mannion has already said we're going to use 130 hectares, so we're going at the lower end of that range. And it says here the higher end assumes the trees are sequestering the equivalent of the council's 2025 emissions by 2025. Whereas the lower end assumes sequestration only by 2050. So basically what it's saying is going at the lower end, which is practical and reasonable. I think it's all we can do. We will actually be carbon neutral by 2050. But that's not a criticism, because it's in the short time scale we've got, 5 years, it's a practical solution. I think it's an excellent way forward. But I just need everybody to understand in 2025 we will not be a carbon neutral council, but we will have taken the actions by the end of 2025 to make sure we are carbon neutral by 2050, which is the national aim. So I think the plan is very good, and everything is in there we should be. But I think I'll just go back to the previous item. I'd like to remind the Cabinet that this carbon action plan shouldn't be considered in isolation. Alongside climate change, the other major threat to the world we've been facing for some time actually, is sustained population growth. Food is going to therefore become short in the future, and we should absolutely not reduce farming capacity in Cheshire East by planting trees on active farmland. That is my strong view. We'd only have to be cutting them down in 20 years' time to make more farming land. There is currently an action in the plan to promote less meat eating. I think this is right in the medium term, but it should only be done alongside lobbying for a simultaneous national farming policy which actually reduces meat imports to this country, rather than threatening our own sheep and cattle farms in the UK and indeed in Cheshire East, which are very valuable to our economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rod Fletcher, did you wish to speak on this item? If Councillor Rod Fletcher isn't there, could I invite Councillor Rachel Bailey to speak?
Hi, sorry.
Oh, right, Rod, you are there.
Sorry, I had trouble getting hold. Yes, I'm here.
You don't.
Okay, over to you, Rod.
Thank you. To help implement this plan, it is important that members of the public in future years continue to have access to council facilities without having to travel long distances. There have been proposals in the past to close some libraries. For example, had Alderley Edge Library been closed, people would have had to travel to Wilmslow. Some years ago, it was proposed to close all but 3 of the household and waste recycling sites. For example, people would have to drive from Congleton to Macclesfield. This policy was ditched at the 11th hour, although Arklid Waste site has regrettably been closed. Can I have an assurance that no further waste recycling sites will close, as this would be contrary to the Cheshire East Carbon Action Plan? Likewise, Councillor June Buckley earlier pointed out that forcing people from places like Congleton, Sandwich and Alsager to drive to Crewe or Macclesfield to visit family graves would also be contrary to the Cheshire East Carbon Action Plan. Cheshire East planners should ensure that there is easy access between estates for both pedestrians and cyclists. For instance, in Alsager, there's 2 new housing estates. One of the planning conditions is that there should be easy access between the 2 estates, which would be about 5 metres. We're still waiting, even though I've had a letter from David Malcolm 2 years ago saying this is going to be implemented. It's half a mile by road, 5 metres by walking through. This needs enforcing. I am concerned that proposals on page 184 could result in an even further cut to bus services with the potential to increase car usage. That's the way it reads. I hope I'm wrong there. On page 185, the electrification of the line between Crewe and North Wales is long overdue. It's around 25 years since it was first proposed by the then British Rail chair, Sir Peter Parker. The fact that diesels have an onboard generator with large fuel tanks means that electrics for something like can be 40% more efficient than diesel traction. Large mainline diesels can average 4/5 of a mile to the gallon. Also, it is wrong in this day and age that there are no stations between Crewe and Chester, forcing people in places like Bunbury to either drive to Crewe or Chester to catch a train. There used to be at least 5 stations between Crewe and Chester. Currently, there are none. Therefore, I believe Beeston Castle Station, like Middlewich and many other closed stations, should be reopened to help comply with the Cheshire East Carbon Action Plan. The beaching plan, which is a long time ago now, Beaching's idea was that you'd close down the rural stations and people would drive to mainline stations. Of course, with motorways being built, that never really happened. But really now we should be reversing beaching and allowing people to have access, walk or cycle, to nearby rail stations. I fully support this proposed plan provided the correct actions are taken. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could like Councillor Rachel Bailey, did you wish to speak?
Thank you. I'm trying to turn the camera on. That's invariably when my signal goes. I don't know whether it's how I look or whether it really is just the connectivity or lack of it here. Can I first of all concur with Councillor Rod Fletcher? I would love the station in Audlam to be reopened, and so would many others. And I know that Quentin Abel is supportive of Swell. And secondly, I agree too with the leader that the learning from COVID-19 will be substantial. And I believe the learning from COVID-19 in terms of the environment and the changing levels in carbon will also be an ongoing science that needs to be taken into account with the work that this council is doing. There also needs to be, as Councillor Clowes endorsed, that as Cheshire East is on the front foot with this work, it absolutely has to ensure that it meshes in closely with any government environment proposals. If I look to the paper before us, I first go to recommendation 2.1.2.7. I'm pleased to learn that £700,000 of external funding has been provided for geothermal. You will recall a bid was put forward previously. The business case was not substantial enough at that stage, and I'd be interested to see the new business case. And I would also want to know how this council is going to assure residents who in the past have been were concerned that geothermal was actually fracking. I would not want to endorse anything that erred towards fracking. It's very important we message what geothermal is. If I then move on to 5.24, further in the document, I'm pleased to see the reference to the current Carbon Neutrality Programme Board and how that will continue to oversee through the Brighter Futures Transformation Board. I'm assuming, therefore, there will be cross-party membership of that board. And in addition, at 5.25, the working groups will be established to lead on the individual implementation. I will repeat what I said in the last agenda item. We're all in this together. It's very important that we take stakeholders with us. And if I think about Councillor Dean's comments, first
come to a conclusion.
Yeah,
you're as well, so you've had your time in the bits, but I think
Can I just finish? Well, firstly, unfortunately, because I couldn't connect at the beginning of the meeting, I need to log an interest as a farming partner. Councillor Dean has referenced farming's role in this. I would again, however, reference in terms of tree planting and the green and pleasant land that we enjoy in Cheshire. We absolutely have to ensure that we resource the right sites to plant trees on. If you plant trees on the wrong loam, they won't thrive. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your comments. Councillor Paul Findlay.
I have nothing further to report on behalf of the Environment Scrutiny Committee Chairman. That was covered, as I said at the time, on the last agenda item, and the points I otherwise would have made personally have been very well covered.
Thank you for your succinctness. Councillor Susie Akers-Smith.
Hello, sorry.
Hello, Susie.
You there? Hi. Yeah, thank you for that. I just wanted to thank the leader and the deputy leader for the role of cycling and walking champion. It is a great honour to hold the role and is well wanted and needed by residents of the borough. I have received nothing but support in the role from the residents throughout, from Adapt Audlam, Mactastic, Transition Winslow, Active Travel Congleton, Knutsford to Handwolf to Crewe, and cross-border connectivity projects. It is well supported. The residents across the borough want to help us. They're delighted we're listening to them. Every town helps me to get the message across to you and to support their ambitions to improve their air quality and reduce congestion in their towns. Therefore, what I want to ask, having attended 12 cycle safaris, where I cycle around the town with the local cycling, walking, parish council neighbourhood plan group, they help me understand the problems firsthand in that town. And therefore, can we start the consultation on the town delivery plans at the beginning of June? If not, when can we start? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Councillor Quentin Abel, did you wish to speak?
Thank you very much. It's really just to bring to everybody's attention that there will be a 10-minute rule bill sponsored by a cross-party group of MPs, and this will allow local communities and businesses to buy their electricity from local energy companies directly. The reason this is important is because it allows local energy schemes to become financially viable and will allow us potentially to achieve the objectives that I regret we are going to be hard pressed to get to by 2025, and also to cater for the other carbon. We could indeed become a place that exports carbon-free electricity. So I will look forward to having the portfolio holders' support in bringing this to the full council, and hopefully the full council will be able to support this bill when it gets presented to Parliament. So I think it'll be a major stage forward. Thank you.
Right, thank you. If I could bring the debate back into Cabinet, as the seconder, if I could pick up on a few of the points. Firstly, it's great to have the cross-party support for this, dramatic change in policy. To pick up on Councillor Tony Dean's point, yes, it does make us carbon neutral by 2025. I do take your point as set out. If you look at the diagram on page 64, we are using some inset on that. And I use the word inset to mean we are using local methods to offset our carbon emissions, not international methods of offsetting our carbon emissions. And also in response to Councillor Rod Fletcher's point, I said previously, I do like the philosophy of reduce, reuse, recycle. The aim should be to reduce our energy consumption and reduce our waste production first, and only after that to reuse and recycle. So if I could ask other Cabinet members if they wish to speak. Councillor Laura Crane.
I think Councillor Brown was before me, but thank you. I'd just like to come in on a couple of points that have been raised there. Councillor Fletcher had a concern around the waste sites and potential reduction of number of there. I can promise you that if we do need to go ahead with that, then it'll be under full consultation, and we'll be taking our other policies into account on that. I fully back the idea of opening the railway stations. I come from a railway background, and I would love nothing more than to see far more local stations out there for us to use. It's just a shame that when we talk about public transport, we did see quite considerable cuts to our subsidised bus network only a couple of years ago, which I think is counterproductive to this policy going forward. So I hope that we can look into further subsidies in the future. And I'd reiterate everything that Councillor Akers-Smith said there. Active travel is something that we desperately need to be looking into more and more, and hopefully off the back of this crisis, something good will come, that people will be walking and cycling much more. So yes, thank you. I fully support this plan.
Councillor Craig Brown.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I just wanted to pick up on the question that Councillor Susie Akers-Smith raised in relation to the LTP town delivery plans. It had originally been our intention to begin consultation on the first 5 towns, that's Wilmslow, Macclesfield, Nantwich, Sandbach and Knutsford, in April. But clearly, in the light of the COVID lockdown, it was impractical to engage local communities at that time. So the intention now is to bring all 10 town delivery plans forward for consultation in the autumn.
Thank you. Councillor Nick Mannion, would you like to sum up the debate?
Thank you, Leader, and thanks for all the positive, constructive criticism, if that's the right word, of this real Pathfinder document. As I say, we're going to follow the principles of carbon neutrality by first prioritising carbon and energy reduction, with a target to reduce our carbon emissions by a further 39%, and then develop local offsetting. We're not going to insetting. We're not going to offset outside Cheshire East. We're not going to buy a solar farm in Lincolnshire or sponsor a project on another continent of the world. We're going to focus our efforts within or around the boundaries of Cheshire East. And Councillor Bailey and Councillor Clowes are quite right. We need to make sure we plant the right trees and the right hedges in the right places. And indeed, that is one of the challenges we've got. All I would like to do is to sum up by reassuring Councillor Abel regarding the 10-minute rule electricity bill. I, as portfolio holder, also strongly support it, and I've written to our local Cheshire East MPs urging them to do so as well. It will greatly assist in our work towards carbon neutrality. That's not zero carbon, that's carbon neutrality. There is a distinction between the two. But I'm happy to commend this, and again I'm happy to report on progress as we deliver this action plan over time in the future. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. The recommendations on pages 106 and 107 of the report have been moved and seconded. If I could ask the Cabinet to vote on this in turn. Councillor Craig Brown.
4.
Sam Corcoran. 4. Laura Crane.
4.
Catherine Savell.
4.
Tony Fox.
4.
Laura Judah.
4.
Nick Mannion.
4.
Jill Rhodes.
4.
Amanda Stott.
4.
Mick Warren.
4.
Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Now, we've been going, well, nearly 2.5 hours now, so I'd like to suggest that we take a 5-minute break, but I'm going to leave everything running. So I'm just going to turn off my camera and I will see you back in 5 minutes so everybody can have a brief comfort break. Thank you. Right, thank you everybody. If we're all set to resume, if I could move on to item 9 on the agenda, which is the North West Crewe Package Infrastructure Agreement. Councillor Craig Brown, I understand you wish to introduce this item and make a proposal, and you also have a presentation. So please everybody bear with us while we get that presentation ready.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Just if I could ask members and members of the public to bear with me for hopefully no more than 10 seconds whilst I share the PowerPoint presentation with everybody. Could you just confirm whether you can now see it on your screens, Leader?
Yes, that's fine. I can see that great.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so I've prepared a PowerPoint presentation to hopefully help just contextualise some of the different elements that I'm going to be introducing and speaking through, which are shown in summary on this slide, and then each of the following slides will deal with them in a little bit more detail. So the proposals which are included in the Cheshire East Local Plan Infrastructure Delivery Plan include the realignment of Smithy Lane, which hopefully you can see on this slide here, indicated by the blue arrow. And this slide also shows you the proximity of the proposed works and the scheme to Leighton Hospital, which is obviously important because the scheme will also provide an improved blue light route to the hospital. The next slide shows that while the scheme will bring a number of benefits to the area, including clearly a much improved highway network northwest of Crewe, as well as supporting the Crewe Master Plan and HS2 growth strategy, it will also include, or involve, should I say, the temporary closure of Middlewich Road, which is shown in this section here to the left of the slide. That's the A530. Whilst some works are being undertaken to the railway bridge. And then to replace Middlewich Road as the primary route through to Leighton Hospital, there will be a new east-west link road, which is shown here towards the bottom of the screen, and that will connect up with an equally new spine road that we've called goes up and down through the centre of the slide, as you can see there. And then finally, the new east-west link road is shown here at the bottom of the slide, and this will be accompanied also by a series of roundabout and junction improvements, as you can also hopefully see from the slide. And then this final pictorial representation shows the full scheme in its context with Leighton Hospital. So moving on to the purpose of the report. The purpose of the report is to enable the council to enter into an infrastructure delivery agreement, including the deeds of covenant with relevant landowners and indemnity agreements in respect of compensation payments. The infrastructure delivery agreement will oblige the council to forward fund and deliver the enabling works as part of the build out of the scheme, and it will also secure repayment of the costs when the land is ultimately brought forward for development. Consideration has been given to proceeding without installing the infrastructure. That's effectively leaving the developer to do it themselves at a later date. However, that would slow the delivery of the wider benefits that have been set out in the preceding slides. And so, in addition to the package of highways benefits that I've outlined in the earlier slides, the scheme will also help to unlock access to 2 local plan sites, LPS4, that's Leighton West for circa 850 homes, and LPS5 Leighton for circa 500 homes. And it's intended that the council will acquire all of the land, of course, by agreement where possible, and will only look to use compulsory purchase of powers as a last resort. Indeed, the council has already adopted a collaborative approach, and the parties owning the majority of the land needed for the scheme have agreed to release their land on the basis that the council contractually agrees to deliver the enabling works. And so the installation of the enabling work during the construction of the scheme supports environmental protection measures by preventing rework and wastage of materials and resources. And so I'm therefore pleased to propose the recommendations set out at section 2, which you'll find on pages 198 and 99 of the report, and which is summarised in the current slide on the screen. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Jill Rhodes, I believe you wish to second the proposals.
Well, in second this, Leader, I reserve the right to speak after.
Thank you. So, visiting members, I have Councillor Janet Clowes and Councillor Rod Fletcher wanting to speak on this item. Councillor Janet Clowes, would you like to go first?
Thank you, Chairman. I welcome these two papers, actually, because they are associated, which will open up Northwest Crewe to an extent that we haven't been able to do before, and that which protects access and routes through to the hospital, of course. As we move forward, what we have noticed on other sites not in our ownership, the actual infrastructure issues as various developers have come to work on various parts of our larger sites have exposed some of these difficulties where, you know, by not thinking ahead and making sure that these projects are undertaken in a timely way, infrastructure has been basically dug up at a later date, and the waste involved in that is costs. In terms of bringing this forward, I'm glad to see that there is mutual agreement by certainly the majority of the parties going forward. That is always the best way forward for the council and for those parties. And I wait to see this develop, and in due course the land sites developed as well, because they are such an integral part of our Cheshire East local plan strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rod Fletcher. Oh, is Councillor Rod Fletcher still there? Did you wish to speak on this?
Hello, yes, can you hear me, sir? Can you hear me, Leader?
Over to you, Rod.
Thank you, yes. Just briefly, on page 197, paragraph D, where it talks about the improved access to Leighton Hospital from Middlewich, Nantwich and Sandbach. Of course, Alsager is missing. And one of the problems with Alsager is that since the reduction of the bus services used to be the 319, now the 317, there's not so many direct bus services. So the number 3 service, which used to go through to Leighton Hospital and now stops at the bus station, if families are travelling by bus instead of by car, they have to change at Crewe, which means they've got to pay twice. And it's been asked for before, but again, along with the carbon footprint that we've been talking about, plus trying to encourage people to use public transport rather than their own cars, we need more through services or through ticketing, because the through ticketing doesn't just cost the public a lot of money, it actually costs the council more money, because people with bus passes are having to buy 2 tickets instead of 1, so there's a cost to the council. So could I please reiterate, I know it's been called for in the past, could I please reiterate the call to have through ticketing so that people from Alsager and other towns as well only need to pay for 1 ticket to travel to Leighton Hospital. Thank you, Sam. I have tried to bring my picture up, but without success. Thank you.
Thank you. I did see you briefly, Rod, but then you went back away again. If I could bring the debate back into Cabinet. Firstly, I do like the friendly rivalry between the towns. And of course, Rod representing Alsager and myself representing Sandbach. So the good people of Alsager, they could either go through the new Crewe Green roundabout, which has worked very well, or they could come through Sandbach. But with that, if I could open it up to debate from other Cabinet members. Are there any Cabinet members wishing to speak on this? In that case, if I could go to Councillor Jill Rhodes as the seconder, is there anything you wanted to come back on?
No, happy, thank you, Leader.
Okay, Craig Brown, did you want to sum up?
Yes, I'm happy to very briefly do that, Leader, just to come back on the points that Councillor Fletcher raised, which I absolutely agree with, but which relate almost exclusively to bus services and not the infrastructure aspects of the item before us today. Otherwise, I'm happy for you to go straight to the vote.
Thank you. So the recommendations on pages 198 and 199 of the report have been moved and seconded. If I could invite each cabinet member to vote in turn. Councillor Craig Brown.
Unsurprisingly, 4.
Sam Corcoran, 4. Laura Crane.
4.
Catherine Bell.
4.
Tony Fox.
4.
Laura Duda.
4.
Nick Mannion.
4.
Jill Rhodes.
4.
Amanda Stott.
4.
Mick Warren.
4.
Again, thank you, members. That is carried unanimously. So moving on to item 10, which, as Councillor Janet Clowes pointed out, is linked to item 9. This is the North West Crewe package approval to authorise the use of compulsory purchase orders. Councillor Craig Brown, would you like to introduce this item?
Yes, I hope you can see again the slide presentation on the screen.
Not yet. Do you want to try again?
I'll try the sharing function again.
Yes, that's it.
That's looking better. Excellent. Thank you. So yes, as Councillor Clowes has rightly pointed out, it's inextricably linked with the previous item. In addition to the package of highway measures, which I set out in the previous agenda item in the slides, this scheme creates a total of 2.9 kilometres of new roads with additional street lighting, as well as dual use footways and cycleways, with, of course, appropriate crossing facilities. The previous Cabinet approved in principle the use of compulsory purchase powers back in March of 2018, but it's now necessary to formalise that as the land requirement has now been established. It's intended, of course, that the use of compulsory purchase powers would only ever be used as a matter of last resort, and that in the meantime every effort will be made to acquire the necessary land through negotiation. Consideration has been given to simply seeking to acquire the land through negotiation itself, but that would not guarantee that the land would be secured. And although an agreement has been reached with the principal landowner, this is conditional upon that landowner securing a planning consent for housing development that is satisfactory to that landowner. And the proposed land to be acquired is the minimum considered necessary to achieve delivery of the scheme. All the property owners suffering stopped up private access will be provided with a reasonably convenient alternative means of access. And in the event that the scheme is not undertaken, the northwest of Crewe can be expected to suffer from increasing levels of congestion, further constrained access to Leighton Hospital, and indeed the Bentley Motors site as well. And therefore I am happy to propose recommendations 2.1 to 2.14 of the Cabinet papers. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jill Rhodes, did you wish to second the proposal?
Happy to second that, Leader.
Thank you. Visiting members, Councillor Janet Clowes.
Thank you. Sorry, have you got me there? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You did
a slight blip. Thank you. Yes, thank you for this. I didn't know whether to actually mention it on the last item or this one, but I think the compulsory purchase orders are really important. Clearly, 2.9 kilometres of new roads is significant. The questions I wanted to ask is, to what extent does that include any necessary compulsory land purchases to realise the Sustrans cycle and walking route extension from Nantwich to Leighton Hospital? And also, is there any way, or have you already managed to sort out the potential conflict between the Network Rail works on the bridge on the Middlewich Road, together with the forward works from Bentley Motors, who are also doing their own infrastructure work on roads adjacent to the site. That would be helpful to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other visiting members wishing to speak? Okay, in that case, if I could bring it back into Cabinet. Any Cabinet members wishing to speak before I go to the proposer and seconder? In that case, if I could hand over to Councillor Jill Rhodes.
Happy not to speak, thank you, Leader.
And Councillor Craig Brown.
Thank you, Leader. I'll just come back briefly on the 2 points that Councillor Clowes raised. The Susterton cycle route, which is also possibly in this case unhelpfully referred to as the North West Crewe package, is actually a separate paper and a separate scheme, and that's probably why it's caused some confusion, but it's not, it's different to this. And secondly, we have good relations with Bentley Motors, and we are in ongoing discussions and negotiations with them to arrive at a conclusion that is satisfactory to both parties. Thank you.
And at this point, I realise I've set the officers an impossible task by asking them to display the recommendations, which go over more than one page. But if we could, the recommendations on pages 212 to 214 of the report have been moved and seconded. If I could invite each member of the Cabinet to say whether they're for or against or abstaining on each item. Councillor Craig Brown.
For.
Councillor Sam Corcoran. For. Laura Crane.
For.
Catherine Cravell.
For.
Tony Fox.
For.
Laura Judah.
For.
Nick Mannion.
For.
Jill Rhodes.
For.
Amanda Stott.
For.
And Mick Warren.
For.
Thank you. That is carried unanimously. Moving on to item 11 on the agenda, which is the A500 approval to proceed with compulsory purchase order powers. Councillor Craig Brown, over to you. And I see we have the presentation up already. Hello, Councillor Craig Brown. Would you like to introduce this item and make a proposal?
Sorry, I'd started doing that and I didn't realise I was still on mute.
Right, carry on.
Right, okay, so Cabinet approved a report regarding this scheme in July last year, but since that report, the design development work has established that a revision to the scheme to the extent of the works is required, and hence the need for this report. So this creates a need to acquire additional land, so authority is sought today to authorise the acquisition of that land. Otherwise, we are dealing here with the same issue as the previous agenda item, and the recommendations are set out at section 2 on pages 356 and 357 of the report, and also a cost estimate and funding breakdown are also set out on page 365. The actual revisions that I just referred to are set out at sections 5.1 and 5.2 of the report, which actually show that as a result of the revisions, actually £1.6 million is saved to the scheme. So on the slides that follow, just wanted to again help to contextualise this for people, to show where the proposed scheme fits in with other infrastructure schemes around the area. So on this slide, you can see the diagonal orange line going across to the left-hand side of the screen. That's the proposed HS2 route, and then second area highlighted is the bit in green here towards the bottom and right of the screen, which is the proposed route of the A500 dualling scheme, and also its connectivity in with the junction 16, I think it is, on the M6, just there. And then we also see on this slide a series of schemes highlighted in blue that have already been completed in the area, starting with the Sydney Road Bridge up at the north end of the slide, the Crewe Green roundabout, the Basford West Spine Road, and the recently completed 5020 Link Road in the centre, and then finally, shown just here by my cursor, the proposed location of the HS2 railway station. So efforts will continue to acquire the land by negotiation, as we said for the last item, which of course remains the preferable option, but the council must be able to demonstrate by the time of the public inquiry that it has done so. It's not realistic to assume that the voluntary acquisitions would be concluded with all the affected parties within the funding window for this scheme, and therefore authorisation of compulsory purchase action is necessary to demonstrate the council's intention to proceed with the scheme. This is a slightly unusual situation, as there are potentially 6 landowners affected, one of which is the Duchy of Lancaster, which of course cannot itself be subject to a compulsory purchase order. And so for these reasons, Cabinet is asked to support the recommendations set out in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Laura Crane, I believe you wish to second the proposal.
Yes, I'm happy to support this proposal. Thank you.
And Councillor Janet Clowes, did you wish to comment?
Yes, if I may. First of all, this is the next stage in what is a long and obviously convoluted process, but the dualling of the A500 is absolutely essential to open up the south of Crewe and to facilitate HS2 when it does come. The redesign is very welcome. I think anything that can save the council £1.6 million is to be welcomed anyway. However, I have had some concerns from the local ward councillors. There was a very detailed and very effective consultation on the original designs, and a lot of local residents got involved, including the parish councils involved in the area. But there have been 1 or 2 concerns raised by landowners and tenants with the ward councillors, wondering whether there was going to be any kind of consultation with them on an individual basis. There was a feeling that perhaps they haven't been consulted about all the details of the change. They're aware of it. I suspect there are some tenants there. I don't know if this is something for Cheshire East to do, whether it's something for the Duchy or other landowners with tenants to do, but I think it is important that all residents who are going to be affected by the changes are actually sort of given that detail. I don't think it will make any difference to this process, because it is a compulsory purchase order or seeking powers to do that. But I do think that there are some residents affected by it, by the changes to the design, who perhaps need to have a little bit more information provided for them. And certainly Councillor Edgar and Mary will be more than willing to give you the details of those residents in due course. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could just clarify the points you're making there about consultation. Are you suggesting that there has been inadequate consultation for us to make a valid decision today, or are you simply saying that we should consult with those people after having made the decision?
No, I think there's been adequate consultation as a whole. It's just the details of these slight changes to the design, and that they think may affect them in some way. But there's certainly no consideration of wanting to block it. They just want to know a little bit more about exactly what it is.
OK, thank you. Are there any other visiting members wishing to speak on this item? No. In that case, if I could bring it back into Cabinet. Any Cabinet members wishing to speak? Right, Councillor Craig Brown, did you wish to sum up then?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Yes, I'm happy to do that and just come back on the point that Councillor Clowes has raised. Yes, the realignment amendments are quite minor. I accept that £1.6 million of saving doesn't sound that minor, but the actual realignment is quite minor. Relates to the redesign of the Meremore Moss roundabout and the cutting near Bluemire Farm, but I think we can quite easily include residents in a further consultation, as Councillor Clowes has suggested. If the local ward members are happy to let us know which residents they are that we should be speaking to, I see no issue with that, so thank you.
Thank you. The recommendations on pages 356 to 357 have been moved and seconded. If I could invite each Cabinet member again to state whether they're for, against or abstaining. Councillor Craig Brown.
For.
Sam Corcoran, for. Laura Crane.
For.
And Flavel.
For.
Tony Fox.
For.
Laura Judah.
For.
Nick Mannion.
For.
Jill Rhodes.
For.
Amanda Scott.
For.
Nick Warren.
For.
Many thanks. That's carried unanimously. Moving on to item 12 on the agenda, the Vulnerable and Older Persons Housing Strategy. Councillor Nick Mannion, could you introduce this item and make a proposal, please?
Yes, thank you, Leader. Back in 2014, Cheshire East Council adopted a Vulnerable and Older Persons Housing Strategy. This set out a clear strategic pathway for suitable and appropriate accommodation provision for a number of client groups who live within Cheshire East. In 2019, this strategy was updated to provide a position statement of what had already been achieved. In addition, we updated the evidence base and highlighted any local or national policy changes that have been made since 2014. The Homelessness Prevention Act is probably the one most elected members are familiar with. The overarching strategic priorities remain the same, in that people are supported to live in their own homes independently for longer, but when required, people can receive the support they need in a wide range of specially supported accommodation within the borough. People are able to make informed choices about the accommodation, care and support options living within Cheshire East. Following the review, the council now wishes to consult on the draft document with key stakeholders, including housing providers, developers, support providers, the voluntary sectors, elected members and of course residents of Cheshire East. The consultation is due to take place during the week commencing the 18th of May and will last for 8 weeks, with an option to extend it for a further 4 weeks. We have taken advice on the proposed consultation approach, given the ongoing COVID-19 restrictions. Consultation will take the form of an online questionnaire and feedback form, which will be made available via the Cheshire East Council website, as well as via social media outlets such as Facebook. Presentations highlighting the outcomes and evidence of the strategy will also be sent to relevant stakeholder groups for their feedback. In addition, as outlined in the agreed work programme for the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for Environment and Regeneration, it's proposed that the strategy be considered after the consultation has been concluded and ahead of a final decision being made on the ultimate version. A final version will be considered by myself as the portfolio holder in consultation with the portfolio holder for adult social care and health to consider the results and to approve the final version for formal adoption. I therefore move the recommendations as outlined at section 2.1 in the report to invite comments on the draft strategy. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Councillor Laura Judah, I understand you wish to second the proposal.
Yes, Leader, I do, and I would like to speak to it.
Okay, over to you.
Right, thank you. I'd like to second item 12, and in particular the issue of domestic violence and abuse. The need for safe places probably has never been greater than it is at this time. There has been a terrifying rise nationally in domestic violence and domestic abuse. Calls to domestic abuse helplines rose by 49% and killings doubled in the first weeks of lockdown. Men contacting a helpline rose by 35%. While it is obvious that the lockdown has caused some difficulties in relationships and in families. We must never allow anything to justify domestic violence or abuse to other people. Can you hear me? Sorry, I'm not.
Yes, Laura, please do carry on. We can hear you fine. We can see you. And I do appreciate it is difficult when you're isolated, that you're not getting any feedback, but we can hear you. Right, Laura, we can't hear you anymore. I think you've muted yourself.
Okay, right. We've talked about opportunities that have arisen throughout lockdown and how we may change after it's over, whenever it is over. And I think this is a huge opportunity now to educate the public, and particularly our children, and we should get into schools to let them know that violence and abuse against any other person is totally and absolutely unacceptable. So I would support that along with the other things as well, but I think we need to pay particular attention to domestic violence. We need to provide refuges for anybody that's suffering from abuse or violence. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. So the recommendations on page 474 have been proposed and seconded. Are there any visiting speakers, visiting members wishing to speak? And I have recorded Councillor Janet Clowes and Brendan Murphy. So Janet Clowes, would you like to go first?
Thank you. I welcome this report. The original report in 2014 was one of mine. It's been a very valuable strategy to have under our belts, but it's quite clear that as time moves on, the legislation changes, the circumstances change, and it is quite right that we should review it and make sure that it remains fit for purpose. I welcome Councillor Judah's comments about domestic violence, but I would argue that every single client group mentioned in this policy are equally important. And some of the work specifically that we've done with our care leavers and with our LD clients has been extraordinary over the last 5 years. And I welcome their contributions to policies both in the last administration and moving forward. In terms of the recommendations, I have a slight problem here as well, I'm afraid, in that once again, if you look at it, before we even have the consultation results, we're being asked to hand over to portfolio holders the right to take on board that feedback, make changes to the strategy and adopt it without it coming back to this council and cabinet system. And I suppose the reason why I feel uncomfortable with that is that if you actually refer back to May the 27th, 2014, the actual time or the moment at which the approval of the strategy was made, it was following the consultation. And there was a very robust paper with the consultation results in it so that we could see it, we could evaluate it, and of course it had already been to scrutiny. So I'm just wondering why there is a change in policy. I, for one, would love to know what the consultation results are going to be and to scrutinise those properly. And then I would have very much more confidence and assurance about the decisions that Cabinet are going to make, rather than basing it on evidence that hasn't yet been procured through consultation. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have Councillor Brendan Murphy registered as wishing to speak on this item, but I can't see him on the line. Is Councillor Brendan Murphy present at the meeting? Right, okay, thank you. Are there any other visiting members wishing to speak? In that case, if I could bring it back into Cabinet, Councillor Catherine Flavelle, did you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Leader. I'm just trying to put my video on. Okay, can you see me now?
I can see and hear you fine.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to comment on Councillor Judah's comments about domestic abuse. And yes, there has been a huge spike. Just as a reassurance, I wanted to just make a statement about Cheshire East Council's commitment to that. We do commission 16 units of emergency accommodation for individuals and families needing emergency refuge as part of our whole family domestic abuse commission, currently provided by Cheshire Without Abuse. These are dispersed across Cheshire East, offering the flexibility to support adults with and without children of any gender and other protected characteristics and additional need. During this period of COVID lockdown, there have as yet been no cases where we have been unable to meet the needs of any local resident needing emergency accommodation. And we're sharing plans in liaison with housing to ensure we're able to respond with both support as well as space should the need arise. I just wanted to make that assurance as we are having an increased referrals rate. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that reassurance. That is very important. Councillor Tony Fox, did you wish to speak on this item?
Yes, thank you, Leader. And I just wanted some clarification, please, on the consultation process because of the current situation around COVID, and also clarification as to whether paper copies can be made available, given that not all of our residents have access to the internet.
If I could hand over to Jan Bakewell, the monitoring officer, to answer the legal question there. Now, you should be able to just speak through this speaker.
Thank you, Leader. Jan Bakewell, Director of Governance and Compliance. If I can assist with that question, Councillor Fox, in terms of the consultation, the report sets out digital only consultation, as you know, due to current COVID-19 circumstances. So in terms of whether that's adequate and legally sound, my legal officers have looked at this and considered this in advance of publication of the report. They've considered a number of factors, such as the gunning principles for good consultation and the latest Consultation Institute advice. What we would say is that the strategy doesn't propose any controversial changes to service provision. It seeks consultation responses on changes to demand to address, to assess what that demand is in order to meet that going forward. So on that basis, it was concluded that the digital only method was satisfactory and adequate in the current circumstances. I am aware that the lead officers intend to extend that consultation to key stakeholders, including registered social landlords and the voluntary sector, but also focus groups, importantly. For example, Learning Disabilities Forum, and I am aware that they are reaching out to them via remote presentations, like Councillor Mannion alluded to. So I think on that basis and the extension of the consultation period if needed, which is in the report, should there not be adequate responses at the end of the period, I think on that basis, Leader, the proposal is adequate.
Right, thank you for that clarification. Are there any other Cabinet members wishing to speak on this item? In which case, if I could pass it back to Councillor Nick Mannion to sum up. And from what I'm hearing, there's strong support for this item, but Councillor Janet Clowes expressed some concern about the delegation of authority to yourself. Perhaps you could clarify exactly how you would intend to use that authority should the Cabinet grant you that delegation.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Leader. Yes, as I said in my introduction to the item, at the conclusion of the consultation exercise, we've offered to put it on the work programme for the Environment and Regeneration Overview and Scrutiny Committee, so they can look at the strategy together with responses to the consultation. I can give an assurance that will be done, and any comments and recommendations from that scrutiny committee I will take into account before approving the final document. Right,
thank you. The recommendations on page 474 of the report have been moved and seconded. I will now invite each member of the Cabinet in alphabetical order to confirm their support for the proposition or otherwise. Councillor Craig Brown.
For.
Sam Corcoran, 4. Laura Crane.
4.
Catherine Clavell.
4.
Tony Fox.
4.
Laura Judah.
4.
Nick Mannion.
4.
Jill Rhodes.
4.
Amanda Stott.
4.
Mick Warren.
Or.
That's carried unanimously. Thank you, Cabinet members. The final item on the agenda then is item 13, procurement of a housing development framework. Councillor Nick Mannion, would you like to introduce this item and make a proposal?
Thank you, Leader. It's another item that I put on the agenda. Procurement of a housing development framework. A fundamental element of achieving the Council's ambition for the environment and economy of Cheshire East is to ensure that we can deliver the appropriate mix of design, style, location, price and tenure of the housing that's delivered and available to residents of the borough. In particular, if we're not able to get the right type and tenure of housing in the right places, we're not going to retain or attract people with the appropriate skills to support the growth of our local economy. Furthermore, we do not know what the housing market will actually look like once the current pandemic is over, but we do envisage that if we move into a recession, then we will see an increased need for the council to influence the delivery of the housing market, and that is something that the registered social landlords and the Chartered Institute of Housing have been signalling quite clearly to the government. As a non-stockholding local authority, we work closely with our key partners, housing associations, who develop, own and manage existing or new housing to meet the diverse housing need across the town, villages and countryside of Cheshire East. However, we cannot rely solely on the market and partners to deliver housing growth or to meet all our housing needs. Cheshire East Council have been considering mechanisms to increase the provision of affordable homes for rent and for ownership, as well as providing the ability to generate a revenue stream to the council to support the delivery of other essential frontline services. This report, therefore, outlines the options that we've considered over the recent months and puts forward a recommendation to procure a housing development framework. This will provide the opportunity to select council-owned land holdings, where appropriate, which have the potential to deliver much needed housing and areas of shortage and need. Through the procurement process, we will identify between 2 and 8 partners who have experience of developing and managing accommodation and can show that they are committed to creating the right design, high quality style and the appropriate type of housing the borough and our local communities need. It will then provide the council with the ability to control the type of provision to be developed and has the potential to bring forward either a capital receipt or an ongoing revenue stream from the council. The framework will be in place for a period of 4 years under current procurement rules and would enable the council to conduct a mini competition for the development of individual or package parcels of council land holdings. We would not have to, however, provide a guarantee of the volume of sites to be procured through this route, nor be contractually locked into the arrangement should a more viable alternative option or route be identified subsequently. This is very much the start of a process, and any future of disposal of a specific site will be taken through the normal decision-making routes, including through Cabinet if the disposal were under the provisions of a key decision. Therefore, members will be able to get assurance that any particular scheme in the future represents best value, meets all the tests that are required in the disposal of land by the council as a local authority. I therefore move the recommendations as outlined in paragraph 2.1 of the report. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Councillor Craig Brown, do you wish to second the proposals?
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I'm happy to second and reserve the right to speak.
Right. Visiting members. I have 4 visiting members registered to speak. Janet Clowes, Rachel Bailey, Brendan Murphy, who I believe isn't present, and Carol Bullman. Could I take those in that order, please? So, Councillor Janet Clowes.
Thank you, Leader. I welcome this policy document. It is a change in direction for the council, something we've been looking at for a number of years, but have been constrained by the legal frameworks that have sat around it. There are a number of queries that the paper raises that haven't, I don't believe, been adequately addressed. and those around section 102 statements are particularly concerning. These are legal agreements made between developers and the council in relation to specific developments. I may have misunderstood the paper, but it suggests that you are going to actually use some of these S106 monies for alternative purposes to develop council land holdings instead. I'm not quite sure, but that sounds to me like an opportunity for exposing the council to legal challenge by developers who are always looking for opportunities, perhaps to minimise their requirements for S106, or indeed to claw them back if they're not being used for the purpose that the legal process intended. The other elements that concern me are in relation to finance, and most of those are summarised on page 551. I am concerned that we are setting general principles here. I understand that each site would be looked at, it would go through planning in the normal way, but this is a strategic document seeking to set specific principles, and that is that there is the potential to sell council assets at below market value, and there is no set there of key performance indicators or objectives that would, if you like, validate taking that approach. It is an approach, but we need to have those criteria set out very clearly at this strategic stage, because they would help inform next decisions on specific sites. Similarly, I'm concerned about the complexity of these potential sites. We may need to go to the Secretary of State for decision making. And of course, we always end up having to think about European state aid issues. So a number of these things I think could have been sorted out at scrutiny, but it hasn't been to scrutiny. I have actually raised this with officers.
The time.
Yeah. Officers, and I have to say the timings don't match up with what I've been told, and I am concerned about this, as indeed is Councillor Findlow. I would welcome your thoughts on this, but I would want to look at that again in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rachel Bailey. Hello, is Councillor Rachel Bailey present?
I'm dropping in and out, so I'm afraid.
Yeah, you're muted. So
no.
I can hear you again, but I can't see you.
Sorry,
so speak.
It's just dropping off a little bit, so I'll just speak rather than open the camera. I share Councillor Clowes' concern in relation to this paper not going to scrutiny. You spoke at length earlier on the importance of good scrutiny. I'm therefore surprised that this paper hasn't been to scrutiny and that you haven't followed your good practice. In terms of housing, up to May 2019, when the administration changed in Cheshire East, Cheshire East had delivered nearly its 30% in terms of affordable housing. I recognise that affordable housing in some areas, as the report says, is not directly that. However, that affordable level was delivered in conjunction with communities, and the work that communities do, particularly our parish councils, on housing needs surveys. I have in Audlam a site that's been developed for key workers. Those properties have not been taken up by key workers, not because of fiscal issues, but because the need is not there, even though it was demonstrated. Those properties have been built under the key worker policy and now will be full residential. I therefore again feel it's key that scrutiny looks at this and involves town and parish councils directly, who have that information on the ground and hitherto have developed affordable housing sites themselves. My next point is cohesive communities are key. The communities, as we have seen in COVID-19, need to interact and be part of, and that is an important point of planning. Two more points very quickly. I endorse Janet Clowes' concern with the commuted S106 monies and use of, because I believe they are in certain areas and there's no guarantee here whatsoever. And I would point out that whilst it's a good headline to say that housing numbers have been reduced. I'm aware that in my ward, actually it's reduced not only the percentage affordable housing, but it's made back land development, the existing properties, more vulnerable to back land development. I ask that you engage with the communities that have said they don't want additional housing before you move forward. The premise I don't have an issue with, but the manner in which you're approaching it, I do. Thank you for your tolerance.
Thank you. The final speaker I have is Councillor Carol Bullman. So I've seen you being present. I hope you've been waiting patiently.
Yes, all the way through, yeah. Thank you, Leader. Yes, I obviously welcome this. I think it's a really good idea. It's desperately urgent and needed in Cheshire East. Is it 500 new applications a month that are somewhere else in the papers, it says, for affordable housing? And it really does need to be affordable, because the builder's definition is 75% of market value, I think, which for a lot of people is not affordable. However, I really welcome this. It supports the council's policies set out at 6.3.1, which are our policy ambitions with regard to jobs-led growth and sustainable communities. And it also, if they're built to Quentin Abel's standards, they will achieve our carbon neutral targets as well. So I really support this. It's just my main query is in regard to the duration of the framework. Why would it only be in place for 4 years? In building terms, that's not very long. And I wonder if this is long enough to evaluate the viability of the scheme. If it is judged to be viable, what are the next steps? Can it be extended or broadened? Because it's quite a small scale thing. Point 8 of the proposal mentions a soft consultation process that has taken place with potential developers. What was the outcome of this consultation? And did the council's powers set out at 6.1.2 and 3, in other words, our ability to cancel and the lack of guarantees for developers, whilst it's great for us, it gives great advantage to ourselves in terms of flexibility. Did this diminish interest in the proposal because of the control? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Before I bring it back into Cabinet, if I could ask Jan Bakewell to comment on the monitoring officer on 2 items. One was Councillor Janet Clowes raised concerns about breaking Section 106 agreements. I think that's a misunderstanding of what's been said, but if Jan Bakewell could clarify that. And also to comment on the issues that were raised about scrutiny.
Thank you, Chair. If I can take those in reverse. On the scrutiny issue, I'm aware that this matter was on the forward plan, so it was published in accordance with the Council's requirements as a key decision on the 6th of March. So that has been discharged in terms of Council's requirements for key decisions for scrutiny purposes. The forward plan was on the agenda for the 16th of March Environment and Regen Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'm not aware that there were any issues raised about this particular report, but it was shown at that point, Chair, on the forward plan as coming to Cabinet on the 7th of April, which was obviously cancelled due to lockdown, the beginning of lockdown. So it has actually come to Cabinet later. And I'm not aware it's been raised until now as an issue. So from my perspective, the public notice requirements have been discharged. On the first point, commuted to
now, I think using the chat facility, Nick Mannion may be able to answer that question.
I'm happy to hand over to Councillor Mannion.
So Councillor Mannion, do you want to come in and answer the question about the Section 106 agreements?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of confusion here. This is solely landholdings that is in the ownership of Cheshire East Council. This is land that is surplus to our future needs. So it's not land identified for housing necessarily in the ownership of other landowners. It is solely land that we own that is now been deemed surplus to our future ongoing requirements. Therefore, the Section 106 issue is not relevant.
Yeah.
Also, regarding one of the reasons we've opted for this approach is because we do not own a lot of land, so they will only inevitably be a fairly, the pipeline will not be a very busy one. And again, it's probable there will only be a small number of sites identified that are applicable and appropriate to put through this process. I could just answer 2 quick queries as well.
Now, I will ask you to sum up at the end.
Okay, then, I'm happy to do that.
Can I ask Councillor Tony Fox, did you want to come in on this item?
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Just to say that I would like the opportunity to work together with Councillor Mannion on this, given sort of it does kind of cross over into my portfolio as well.
Yeah, I'm sure that will be granted. Now,
I'd like to say something.
Sorry, who was that?
Paul Finlow. I'd like to say something about scrutiny.
Right, we have brought it back into Cabinet. So
well,
if it's something you wish to say.
I have tried doing this meeting chat business, but I don't know if it worked. I just wanted quickly to say, from a scrutiny perspective, this is a potentially major policy issue and it should have gone to scrutiny, and it's not going or gone to scrutiny. Okay. Now, I accept what she said about the 6th of March. I understand that in terms of the forward plan. But the meeting of Environment and Regeneration liaison meeting was held on the 2nd of March, and it wasn't on the plan there, and it wasn't on the work programme, which I think is highly regrettable in process terms.
You are directly contradicting what the monitoring officer said.
No, you didn't hear what I said then, did you?
Yes, you said it wasn't on the work plan. And
hold on. I said it wasn't on the work programme, it wasn't on the forward plan for the Environment Regeneration Overview Scrutiny liaison meeting held on the 2nd of March. It went on the 6th of March, 4 days later, and that is why there's been no scrutiny, because it's not been capable of being put before the Scrutiny Committee because it was changed and updated 4 days later.
I think that question has been addressed by the monitoring officer, and I would disagree with what you said there. There has been an opportunity for scrutiny. That point has been addressed. The matter is now being debated by the Cabinet meeting. So if I could ask, are there any other Cabinet members wishing to speak on this item? All right. If I could ask Councillor Craig Brown as the seconder, is there anything else you wish to say on this item?
Just very briefly, Leader, yes. I see this as a policy framework rather than an action plan, which I assume is why there is no mention of specific sites or housing numbers in the report. That's fine. Clearly, my interest in this is to support the provision of affordable housing, particularly in the north of the borough, where house prices are so much higher and effectively keeping young people and families out of the market. My personal preference, and I do appreciate there may be some divergence from Labour colleagues here, would be to see a higher proportion of affordable homes made available either at discount to market sale or as shared equity as opposed to social rental, as I actually want to see us help young people get a foot on the ladder of home ownership. However, I do support the framework as a step in the right direction, as I very much fear if we don't do something, we will see an increase in young skills and talent leaving the borough to the detriment of our economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Nick Mannion, did you wish to sum up before we go to the vote?
Yes, and I can offer some reassurance to Councillor Finlow. As a portfolio holder, I'm happy to present the overall approach to a future scrutiny committee before the procurement activity commences. In addition, any future decision relating to a specific disposal will be subject to separate decision making at the council, and indeed it's subject to the normal development control and planning process. Coming back to Councillor Bowman's point, she mentioned about the 4 years. That's a good practice or sort of statutory provision for this type of framework. And obviously, at the end of the 4 years, we'd have to renew it, amend it, or adopt an alternative approach. I think there was one other query as well, which I could add for. We've not identified specific sites yet, but they're all in the ownership of the council. This is not and the partners we will be working with are usually consortia of developing housing associations. As part of the SOC consultation, we've had roundtable discussions with about 4 or 5 of these consortia, some of whom include local housing associations who currently have stock in Cheshire East, others who've operated similar framework arrangements with local authorities elsewhere in the North West and the North Midlands very successfully. So there, the office there, I'm quite happy for the Councillor Finlow's scrutiny committee to look at the proposal before we actually commence the procurement activity.
Right, thank you. The recommendations on page 546 of the report have been moved and seconded. If I will now invite each member of Cabinet to confirm their support or otherwise. Councillor Craig Brown.
4.
Sam Corcoran. 4. Laura Crane.
4.
Catherine Bell.
4.
Tony Fox.
4.
Laura Judah.
4.
Nick Mannion.
4.
Jill Rhodes.
4.
Amanda Stott.
4.
Mick Warren.
4.
And that is also passed unanimously. Many thanks, everybody, and thanks to everybody who's cooperated during this meeting. It has taken longer than normal Cabinet meetings, but I think it's gone relatively smoothly. We've had some disagreements, we've had some contentious items, but we've managed to have a good discussion and we've made the decisions effectively. So thank you to all those who've cooperated in this meeting, and particularly to the staff who've made this meeting possible. I think it's worked rather well. I would like to end, though, by giving my thanks to all the staff of Cheshire East Council for the way they've adapted to the current situation, and I do send out my heartfelt thanks to all of them. So thank you all for attending this meeting. Meeting closed.